Cool. Where's did you try inviting Dea or Malik? I don't think Malik's joining us.
Let me see. I don't think this is on the channel yet. I'm not seeing it on the channel on my phone.
Oh. Oof. Let's just start calling random Goths. Put out the bat signal. Well, you can call people too. I'm trying to call Dea right now, but she's not picking up. Oh no. Right. Ow.
I got my fancy backdrop already set up.
You can see my light switches. That's how fancy I am. Ooh, it's still called elitism. Shit. I want to change this shit. We will never not have problems. Oh shit, we are live. Yeah, we definitely
are live.
I gotta change the title of the stream. I'm trying to. Problem is that it's kind of a finicky bitch. Ooh. Ooh, no, I got it. Obscura Undead. I think there's like 18 people watching us. Hi, 18 people.
Are there 18? My live chat says 9. I'm looking on my phone right now. What I like to do is I just put my phone on mute and I just have it up on my phone.
When you get a chance, can you bring me the piece of paper in my tote bag?
What?
When you get a chance, can you bring me the piece of paper in my tote bag?
I'll ask you again in a sec.
Okay, I'm a piece of shit, sorry.
All right, apparently the audience cannot hear Michelle.
I think we're also frozen because the live stream isn't moving. Oh no, wait, it's moving.
Yeah, it is. There's just a delay, as usual. The typical streaming issues. I need to get fiber optic internet.
I supposedly have that bullshit. Okay. Okay, display capture. Okay, will you guys talk, and can anyone hear the important people?
All right, people in the live chat. Can you hear me?
I just wrote.
And can you hear?
Who can you hear? Because I got a new laptop, y'all. I had a catastrophic hardware failures. And have had this laptop for a week and have been working 12-hour days. So setting up a laptop, I just needed time off of computer over the weekend. I set it all up. It was all working. Of course, when we go live stream, it's not because that's how it is.
Oh, Dea says she can hear everyone. And so does Thoughts.
I always
I'm
say
sorry.
Toth. I say Toth because
Toth.
when people say
So-
Thoth, to me it sounds like people going to row. I've always found it pretentious, except, outside the U.S. it actually is called to row. All right, I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, hey, I got a notification that we're live.
Yep. Oh no, there are people telling us we've been live for a while. We just suck. Michelle, can you call in some? Can you call in some other goths?
I doubt it. They're probably not on my Skype.
Throw out the goth signal.
Surprise!
Hang on. Okay, now we're all looking. Just a sec, y'all. Let me get the display off. I made my Skype small. Now my Skype is the right size. I don't even know how to fucking get to the damn thing.
Oh,
I'd
your
have to-
desktop is on. Oh, there's Skype again.
I can't move the add to the call. And no. Sorry for anyone who can see who's on there. I try to not have my address book showing. I have very few goths in there that are... It's kind of... I call it my professional Skype.
But goth is your profession. I'm very confused.
Skype for business? Yeah, we're
A
professional
piece of
goth.
paper in my tote bag. Okay.
Well, inviting
as
someone
soon-
last second to a live stream, I'm not going to go to some band I talked to like 8 months ago and go, hey, remember me? Can you get on our live stream?
Maybe you can ask Brandon to come on because he's one of my examples for one of my talking points. So I have talking points.
Hi, Caroline. We got Latinx, Gothic
Yay!
in the chat.
Oh,
Hello.
Good.
I am Ruin. Hello. Lots of people in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. God damn it.
Hello to everyone in the chat.
So,
Give me a minute
this is
here.
the. Oh, okay. I'm giving Michelle a minute.
Oh, no,
she
no,
needs
you
a
can
moment.
talk.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So, as usual. Anyway, so this is the topic of the live stream we are doing this week. As usual, it is done in traditional Obscura Undead chaos fashion. It's kind of becoming our calling card, but
Hang on.
we.
I
like it. It's very DIY.
I've got you
It's
guys
my life.
totally fucked up.
Can hear us, considering that OBS or Skype is down. So, oh, there she is. Hello.
Yeah, so sorry. I couldn't get... if I go to the chat to my address book without just scrolling through this and trying to invite someone straight out, then it closes the video window and I can't get it back because I don't know how. And I clicked
Gotcha.
on the thing that looked like a video and it called. So I've called Brandon now. Yeah.
Wait, really?
On
According
accident.
to the chat, they can hear us. So
Yeah,
I think we're live. We're ready to go.
I think we are live and ready to go. I mean, you could also call Carfax.
Really? You think he's
I
just sitting
mean-
around going, hey, I wonder if I could get on a goddamn live stream tonight. You could call
Judging from
Carfax.
chat, yes.
You call
Say
him?
call Carfax.
Stop. Anyway,
You have to
this
do
is
it.
the topic of our
asked,
stream.
I already embarrassing asked Brandon.
I shouldn't do that. My boobs jiggle.
Like Sansombra, Brandon?
Yeah. Okay, I'm getting my Facebook open because it's oh, okay. Where is he? Who the hell? What am I looking at? Oh, it opened on somebody else. Y'all continue talking. I'm just gonna sit here like a.
Are you
total-
sure?
No.
Can I?
No.
Can't.
No. But
All right.
you could be over there messaging Carfax and inviting him.
No, thank you. I'm very shy.
What
Um,
makes you think I'm not shy?
I would like to know the value of my 2015 Honda Civic.
It's a Honda. I hear those don't depreciate. That's the topic of tonight's live stream.
If you buy them pre-owned, if you buy it a few years pre-owned, that's the best value.
Fascinating. Anyway, the topic of our fucking live stream, Jesus, is basically... God damn it! Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is comedy gold, man. Comedy gold. Yeah,
Welcome to the shit show.
Well, we're just not prepared. I can't find Brandon in my Facebook. Damn it.
Dea says she'll be on as soon as she stops having bird-related troubles.
Oh, her co-teacher is such a jerk.
I know. Okay, so the topic of today's live stream is Will It Goth? Essentially,
wait, say that again?
Will It Goth?
I thought it was Is It Goth?
That same damn thing. It is actually Is It Goth. But, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, and this is why we have Kelly here, because she has done a number of videos on this. Superhero pose. Exactly. And we're basically going to be talking about what the objective definition of goth is, and talking about some of those early bands that always get lumped into goth, but we may or may not have disagreements, like last week. Okay, I gotta read this comment real quick. Last week, or was it 2 weeks ago, someone asked, where do we stand on the debate as to whether or not Susie and the Banshees are goth? Well, we're going to discuss them, The Cure, Bauhaus, Joy Division, and some of these early bands that tend to get called goth, and we're going to talk about whether or not they are goth. And then I have some other discussion questions that I think would be fun if we get around to those. And also, I would love to be able to field questions from everybody. Hi, Dea.
Hi.
As to what is or is not goth. So this is going to be pretty music heavy with your friendly neighborhood elitists.
Well, I'm not an elitist. People don't call me an elitist. Don't drag
Plus
me into
Michelle.
drama.
And Kelly. And Dea. It's
I
really
don't
just
get accused of that. Surprisingly enough, I don't get accused of elitism.
I mean,
I don't know if I ever have. I don't think I have been accused of being an elitist.
I self-identify as an elitist. That is both my sexuality and gender. Thank you.
It's also partly just probably from being a moderator on the Gothy Discourse.
Yeah. Also, Dea, you have no video. Why don't you have video?
I don't know, but I have audio, right?
Right. We see your
I'm gonna
telephone.
Oh, Kelly, you have been dubbed elitist by the Count.
Well, thank you, the Count. I'm honored. I feel like a real goth now.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. the Count.
I'm gonna leave the call and rejoin.
Mixter. Huh? Oh, bye. I love you. I miss you.
That is a cute way to say it.
Mixter?
Yeah, I like it. It's cute.
I think I got that from Dea.
What?
Alternative titles.
Oh my god. Okay. I'm just catching up with this stuff. I don't know shit.
What type of alternative? What? I missed it. I had left
for
the
like
call.
Miss and Mister. I said
Oh, mix. Yeah, that's what I use.
Mix is bogus, but I like Mixter.
Fine.
Anyway,
why isn't my video working?
I don't know, but you can still talk to us. We still love your voice.
Well, at least someone does.
What?
I have huge vocal dysphoria.
Oh, okay. I understand that.
Yeah. But then again, I was going to say a lot of dysphoria, so it's not just my voice.
I have a lot
Well,
of
Dea,
dysphoria,
I think
too.
you have a very sweet, soft voice.
Yeah.
Why, thank you.
Nice.
Creepy.
Way to sell it.
I Am Ruin says we are currently in the everything's broken portion of the chat. This is true. Thank you for noticing.
Yeah.
We are. Okay,
so
let me
sweet.
leave that. Let me get my top chat back up. Okay.
Yeah, because people are wondering where you went.
What? Oh shit! My face moved. And it won't go. Okay, hang on. I can do this, man. I can fucking do this. Oh
The
my
world
god!
is
Look,
broken.
it's blurred my background. Oh, that's kind of cool. I did not do that on purpose. All right.
The world is broken. I sat down at Facebook like 3 times today, just wanting to post I am broken today, and then I'm like,
My
not
hair
quite
is-
yet, not quite yet,
Well,
not quite.
It's funny, for the plague, I finally hit my listless day yesterday. So it kind of continued a little bit into today. So here we go. Got listless right as trying to plan stuff. So, at the most appropriate times possible, right?
I mean, I feel like just in general, Goth is pretty listless.
It can be. Okay, so so the Susie question.
Well, not the Susie question. We're going to start first by defining objectively what is Goth.
Well,
All right.
it's a feeling.
I
Specifically
gotta
as a
stop you
music
right
genre.
there.
Goth is a feeling. Don't y'all know? Billie Eilish.
No,
I
as
got-
goth
well-
rock as a music genre.
I gotta stop you right there because and this may come as a surprise to some, but I don't think goth can be objectively defined as a music genre. I think it can be generally defined, but I do think that there's gray area and nuance and music categorization in general. Obviously, there are some bounds. There's definitely music that is not goth. There's definitely music that is goth. But I think the boundaries have a little bit of gray area. And
I'm a big fan of like genre
that's-
clouds.
Yes.
and so I don't think music can be in entirety. I don't think music can be objectively goth or not goth. There's some music that could be objectively not goth or objectively goth, but there's also music that falls in the purgatory region.
Oh, we have a purgatory region? Because I believe in the genre cloud where, you can get further or closer away from the like nebulous center.
Yeah.
Like, but
For example, Drab Majesty. It is that's one of those ones where it's gray area. I have seen very knowledgeable goths when it comes to like music, goths who know a lot about music genres and subgenres and styles and categories of music, who say that Drab Majesty is not goth because the synth overpowers the guitar. But there's a lot of goths who are also very knowledgeable about goth music who will say that Drab Majesty is a goth band. And that's what I mean by the border is a little bit fuzzy. It's not as broad as some people want to take it out, but there is a little bit of gray area there in between the music categories.
so if it's the sense, if we had Drab Majesty out at like the edge of my hypothetical genre cloud, if you just mix the synths down, would it be more goth, like closer to the center then?
Apparently,
Because-
see, I go back and forth. I'll take either goth or goth adjacent for them. I've called Drab Majesty both goth and goth adjacent. But
I cannot call Modern Mirror goth or goth adjacent. I think that is the furthest that
I
they've
do
come from
agree.
it. But
And
their
I feel
I feel
early
like one or
stuff.
two songs are goth adjacent at least.
Well, that's even true of a lot of very traditionally goth bands, that they'll have songs or even whole albums that aren't that strongly in the gothic category.
Yeah, and I would say that's true of a lot of artists, that you can't pigeonhole them into one category. It's really going to vary depending on album or even the track. A lot of musicians will like to experiment with sound, because if you try to box a musician into one category, that's going to limit their creative expression. I mean, there are definitely musicians who do overall fall into one category. For example, Corpus Delicti. Like their music will fall into that goth rock category. Well, they're going to start recording music again, so we'll see. But from what they put out, it's goth rock music or Sansombra. is goth rock music. But there are most musicians do, especially if they're around for a long time, they'll have a number of different sounds or sound evolution. So I think if you try to categorize or place a single category on a musician or band or artist, that it would be difficult to find one category that describes the entire discography of a lot of artists. So it's there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of nuance.
Well, I mean, it's because music is a form of creative expression, but
Right.
if we want to talk about what we can put into this general definition of goth, what's in there? I think guitars are definitely in there. A bass line, drums, just speaking music, like instrument-wise, and I think that having a very strong bass line is essential for anything I call goth rock.
Yeah, almost driving. Yeah,
Mhm.
like if you're talking about goth rock, and the thing is, it's
just
also a
goth rock.
discussion. It's a discussion of what all music counts as goth too, because there are people who will say it is just goth rock. There are people who say it's goth rock, dark wave, certain styles of post punk.
Ethereal wave, death rock.
But with goth rock, yes, I would say in general, what a staple of goth rock in my mind is a driving bass line that really drives the rhythm, that really creates a lot of the structure to the sound.
Okay, so that is our good bass line. Nah. Thank you.
I know you were trying to be funny there, but I just feel like, ooh.
Hey, that's my best jokes, is the ones that just kind of go. "Ooh."
Right. It's almost a
Those are
dad
more
joke.
like your only joke.
We need a drummer, but don't bump.
So,
Well,
back to the drum comment before. So even there, it's a very limited kit for what gets included in goth rock. Whereas if you start getting into some of the other things that could be included with drums, like they wouldn't be part of goth rock at all. Like if you start adding in conga drums, those are drums, but that's not the type of drum you would hear in a goth song.
It's true. I don't necessarily want bongos or conga drums in my goth rock, but I've heard it and it works.
I know I've heard conga drums.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Like a little bit of hand drumming in there, or a djembe.
Yeah.
I, in particular, find it very weird when I listen to a goth band that has a rhythm guitarist.
Really?
Mm.
Why?
Yes. Because that's not something that I subjectively associate with goth. That's something that I associate more with like metal.
Or blues. I would
blues.
agree. I would agree that the rhythm is usually driven by either the bass lines or a drum machine in goth rock. At least how I experience goth rock. But I think it's good to define goth rock because there's this distinction of goth rock versus gothic rock, which the term gothic rock, as I have experienced in the goth scene, tends to be more of an umbrella term that incorporates both goth styles of post-punk and goth rock. Whereas when someone says goth rock, they're usually referring to the style that first came out of the second wave, that first came out of the Sisters of Mercy taking off in the mid 80s. I know the Sisters of Mercy, they put out singles in the early 80s, but first and last and always, 1985, that's when they first hit the Billboard charts. And that's when they first started getting widespread recognition, and that sound, and it does have more of a hard rock sound to it than maybe the earlier post-punk, than the Bauhaus, the Susie, the Cure. That, in my mind, when I say goth rock, that's what I'm talking about. Is second wave goth, third wave goth rock. It's a little harder in its sound than that first wave of goth, than the first like goth post-punk stylings. Right. So I think it's good to point to kind of what you're talking about with goth rock, because there are some people who will say gothic rock and they mean both goth rock and the early, like, kind of first wave goth post-punk, which of course was not called goth post-punk back then. The word goth wasn't thrown around for this music as much back then. Some people, I think, in the Europe and UK did say, like, call it gothic in the 80s. But in general, like, this idea of goth rock is a retroactive categorization.
I mean, to be fair, any sort of categorization is retroactive because we can't actually witness and classify change as it's happening, so...
They called it gothic music back then. I am one of those people who does not differentiate. It's all gothic rock, and goth rock is just a lazy way to say it. And I think Bauhaus
I
is
definitely...
early gothic rock.
I definitely treat it as a difference between, you know, an adjectival use and a noun use. Like, that, those are very different things for me.
I differentiate from a musicological standpoint. From a cultural, kind of sociological standpoint, there's a difference. And I think that gets missed in discussions online about goth music a lot, that there is a difference between kind of cultural, sociological relevance to the goth scene and musicological, kind of like genre, music theory based categorizations of music, because what is relevant to the goth scene from a cultural standpoint is a lot broader than what is included in the genre categorizations, if you want to point to, like, the musical elements that make up the music. But I do tend to, in discussion, make a difference between that first wave of goth I describe as goth post-punk, because it isn't as hard in sound as that second and third wave of goth that started with kind of like Sisters, Fields of the Nephilim, Red Lori, Yellow Lori. Into like the 90s, you had like Rosetta Stone and bands like that were a little harder in sound than the first wave, like Bauhaus, Susie the Cure. And I do tend to make that distinction when I'm talking about music, but when I talk about music, I'm generally speaking from a, like, sonically sound-based perspective. But culturally and sociologically, and just from a perspective of events and what bands were playing together in the scene, there is a difference there.
Right. Well, just speaking musically, like, we reference like waves of goth all the time, and I think that those are an important thing to understand because it kind of like marks like evolutions in just like our music sound. But what people call first wave, even though it gets called first wave of goth, I don't like. Although I will call it first wave, I don't like calling it goth without calling it proto goth, because hush, because all the elements were. Yeah, well, whatever. And I'll tell you why. It's because all of the elements are there. They just didn't get basically cherry-picked and codified until second wave, you know, with what the Sisters were doing. But that's my perspective. That's.
I think that's fair. I generally consider them the first wave of goth. And I consider proto-goth more of that dark post-punk sound in the late 70s that kind of preceded those bands. But I could see the case to be made. Like, I definitely know people who consider the Sisters of Mercy to be the start of, like, true goth.
I have heard that called the actual first wave, and then you have, like, what came before it. But I think that it does a disservice to not... To start first wave at the Sisters instead of starting first wave at, you know, these very foundational elements of what became, like, our markers.
Typically, it's Bauhaus is usually the starting point for a lot of people when they cover the history of goth. They'll start with Bauhaus as like the godfathers of goth, and to be honest, they were a dark post-punk. They were a more kind of like morbidly themed dark post-punk than, say, Joy Division, which Joy Division and Bauhaus, like, they were like right up against each other when, like, from a timeline perspective. Like, Joy Division and Bauhaus were kind of like recording their first releases in a similar time frame. But Joy Division kind of got more publicity first before Bauhaus, and people love to start the goth timeline with Bauhaus, but they are both dark post-punk. And with Bauhaus, of course, Bela Lugosi's dead, and that was released as a single. That's like a very like dark post-punk sound, but not all of Bauhaus's discography. It has that almost like goth style of post-punk sound to it. Same thing with Joy Division. There are Joy Division tracks that come very close to what we would call like that goth post-punk sound, like She's Lost Control. That's very close to that like dark post-punk sound. But then you have other tracks by Joy Division like Disorder that are closer to almost like a 70s hard rock sound. So it was a lot more loose with the early bands.
Well, I think that that's just true of post-punk. It was very much all about experimentation, and it's kind of, and just to get a little bit off topic, it's kind of why I find a lot of modern post-punk to be just a touch boring, because it's following just the same trends, and I feel like there isn't as much experimentation as I'd like.
Right.
But
specific guitars are called post-punk now. It's like, you know, the post-punk guitars in modern post-punk, instead of having this huge range of things with a few elements that are similar.
Post-punk's a pretty broad umbrella.
It is a very broad umbrella, but unfortunately you see so many bands like getting fucking bottlenecked into this one sound.
Yep. And it's that one specific guitar sound. Kind of like you hear that gothic guitar sound for modern music, and you're kind of like, okay, but there's this huge umbrella of bands back in the 80s, if we're going to go back to the old days, and they did all this different shit that went from psychedelic bordering into metal and everything in between that. And so when people are like, well, that band's metal because they had one song that has some guitars that sound metal, I'm like, no.
Defining a band's sound off of one element in one song out of like a discography of dozens.
How many times have you heard
that's Goth's problem?
How many times have you heard somebody discount completely a modern gothic rock band because they sound like the Sisters? And then if you listen to the song that they're stating, it's like the first maybe two measures of music. We're talking like 6 notes that sound, and Marianne is pretty common, that you'll hear just that little tiny bit of intro, and then the whole rest of everything in the entire catalog is completely different from that, but still gothic, whatever the hell you want to call it at this point. But they get discounted.
Headlines.
Yeah, but
you read music journalist headlines, and it picks on that one element, and because I feel like that happens a lot, where people are just like, you know, Sisters, blah blah, and then whatever band, and then I listen to it, and I'm just like, I don't really get how they're making such a strong comparison, but.
Yeah,
okay.
It makes me completely fucking nuts, because what that's doing is you've made a value judgment on this whole band based on 3 notes on the beginning. One time it was 3 notes. There was a band, somebody's like, they sound too much like the Sisters. And I was like, I gotta go back and listen to that shit. It was 3 notes of one song. There were elements of Fields of the Nephilim, a little bit of Baja. I mean, all the influences you expect in a modern goth band in really great music. But to discount a catalog of 10 songs because the first song sounds like that makes me fucking crazy. You're doing yourself a disservice, you're doing our musicians a disservice, and you're discounting their creative effort. Some bands do sound just like a bunch of other stuff.
Well, it's kind of like almost saying, like, if you listen to a modern blues artist and say, like, oh, well, all the modern blues artists sound like Robert Johnson.
Well, that's not true.
Yeah.
Be closer to Howard
I don't
Wolf,
understand that reference, but cool.
Okay, Robert Johnson's kind of like the godfather of blues. Robert Johnson was the earliest blues artist that was recorded on record, for, you know, like Victrola Records. So he's kind of like the first like widely circulated blues artist, recorded. Yep. On physical copy and circulated. So if you were to say like a blues artist sounds like Robert Johnson, it's like, okay, well, this is to compare all the artists in the genre to the predecessor kind of like of the genre, is to not allow that sound to become a genre in its own right.
Right, it keeps it very linear, and that's...
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's the person who created the genre. While people will be like, "Oh, that's so cheesy," the creator can't be cheesy. But people copying the creator can be cheesy, and there's always going to be elements. Robert Johnson was a guitar virtuoso. He came ready-made, singing and playing all the stuff, made a huge flash, and croaked early. So there's a lot of elements of what he did because he brought up the technical level of guitar. So what we're seeing is the technical levels of Sisters of Mercy, Fields of the Nephilim, Bauhaus, The Cure, Susie, all those bands from the 80s, from like 1991 or so and earlier. And so we're always going to hear, or usually, not always, we're usually going to hear some little hint in there. But just because there's some little hint doesn't mean that the band is shit and all they did was copy First and Last and Always. It means that they're, like the rest of us who are listening to it, are heavily influenced by what created the fucking genre.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so like if we're using Robert Johnson as a comparison, he basically fathered the 5-bar blues style, or like your standard like bar blues. And so if you take Sisters of Mercy, for example, they created a lot of the style elements that became the modern goth rock genre. And so if someone has those elements, people are quick to say, oh, Sisters copycat,
right.
or whatever. And it's just like, is it a copy of the Sisters, or did the Sisters of Mercy kind of widely circulate a new style of music that is now flourishing with many artists
that's
now within that same style?
Right, and the same goes for some of the stuff in the Fields of the Nephilim, because there's something Fields of the Nephilim does that a lot of modern goth. Oh, hi Malik. A lot of modern gothic rock will do as well, and they just kind of take off into that psychedelic space, like where all of a sudden a song gets really long. Except that Fields of the Nephilim did not invent that. That shit was on like every fucking rock album in the 70s. Like the last song in the album would be like 9 to 12 minutes long, and it would kind of take off into this contemplative experimental stuff. So when I hear people say that something's Field of the Nephilim, when they do that in an album, I'm like, no, bullshit. You gotta go way back. That's just plain old rock influence, and gothic rock has a lot of, rock influence. I know it's crazy.
Well, you can always take music back further. If you want to look at music influence, you can always take it a step back further. So
we are complete.
Goth rock, you can always take it back to the start of like modern goth rock with the Sisters of Mercy and stuff. You could take it a step further and take it back to the early beginnings of rock and roll. You could take it a step back further and take it back to blues. Like, so like music, you could always like go a step back in the music evolution and say this came from this.
Right, well, there's always been dark ass themes in music. I mean,
but that doesn't discredit the merit of the modern iteration of that music.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying, and it's disheartening when people just can't quite figure that out.
I got distracted from the conversation because we look like the Brady Bunch.
Well, did you say I put myself in the middle?
Yeah. Also, you guys kind of lost me on the blues conversation. I can't keep up with this, but it's very interesting.
I feel like I'm Cindy Brady.
I'm fucking Alice, so that's... Oh, maybe I am fucking Alice. No, I'm like the old lady in the group that has to clean up all your...
You are. Garbage. You're in the middle. You're in the middle. You're Alice.
Well, put your goddamn socks in the laundry.
Can you at least get the Brady Brunch reference, Azzy?
I feel like Azzy's Marsha.
Yeah.
Marsha.
That's about all I know.
Malik would have to be Peter, because Greg was a douche.
Okay, so if we can agree that goth rock has guitars.
Okay, yeah. So the one element that we kind of like discussed as like a critical element is a driving bass line.
Driving bass line, yes, absolutely. Are you smoking my smokes?
Right, well sometimes the bass line becomes the melody, and That's extremely unusual in other rock music. That's very, very much goth genre. It happens, don't get me wrong, but it's unusual. So you see it almost
Melodic bass, yeah.
most bands will have
There's
something
hooks
that at
too.
least starts with bass.
There's hooks too. There's a difference between melody and hook. So like melody is going to like carry a like more lengthy tune to it, whereas hook is going to be a more repetitive pattern, like a short repetitive pattern. But goth rock kind of has both. But the driving bass line, I would say, a lot of times in goth rock carries the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. Well, especially since we never know with bands. Well, I mean, we do know when we see them if they're using drum machines, and yes, we know when we hear them, but if they're going to use a drum machine or a live drummer. Yeah, there's a difference. There's less difference now than there was back then, because back then you always knew it was a drum
harder
machine.
and harder to tell.
Yeah, and some people actually are really good with making the drums sound like they're a live kit. But I have to
Well,
say,
because you can sample live kits, and then long as you have it playing in a way that sounds natural and not just so repetitive it's robotic. Then,
right. I still think it's a treat to see a live drummer with a show. It's just a treat.
I prefer it.
Yeah, when you can get it. I'm not saying it's not good without it. I think it's great without it, too. There's a lot of bands that are just kicking ass all over the place. But it's kind of this weird, rare bird. You know, it's like seeing the bird of paradise at the zoo with its tail open.
Well, I'm married to a drummer, so I agree.
Okay.
I do like seeing drummers. But drum machines are cool. A lot of my favorite bands use drum machines, and you know, there is a person behind the drum machine. Someone has to program those drum machines.
Not always. I found a random setting on my drum program.
Okay, if you use a preset, so maybe some people use a preset, but I would...
With the Digitech, I can literally set it to different probabilities for when it's going to trigger certain things and change it up completely randomly. So there is a good amount of randomness that's built into it. But they have to program it.
I would say in general, there's at least some editing that happens. Like, especially if you're going to use a preset through your entire song and have your drum machine play the same pattern the entire way through the song, that's, I mean, I'm not a
But it doesn't work that way, anymore, because you can literally have certain steps in a 64 or 128 step chain. You can have certain steps where it has probabilities of other things triggering and having these side chains that add a lot of randomness to it on the drum machines. That's what I was getting at before, that it's getting much harder and harder to tell.
I agree.
You have to set it up ahead of time, but it's actually going to make the song different each time, because even when you play that back again, they're not going to trigger at the same moment, so it'll never even sound the same twice.
Really?
Yeah, but even that would require like human intervention. If anything within like the settings of whatever program you're using for your drum machine.
Well, a lot of times
so we're saying a goth beat does not happen
in a void. You don't need a separate program, though. It's built into the drum machines now. Like, if you have an Electron, you can easily do it. That's built right into it. And there's several other models. I think the Roland TR-8S does it as well. And I want to say the MC707, I'm like 100% sure that has probability generators where you would set it up ahead of time like you would any other track that you were doing on your drum machine, and then it's going to play it back randomly every time. Now, there's certain things you wouldn't want to leave up to random chance, but other little accents or little fills that you could do it randomly. And I mean, some are so easy as literally turning a knob that has different random fill effects, like the Roland TR-8 or TR-8S, where you just have to hit that randomize and you'll get a nice little fill, and they'll have different styles or it be incredibly random.
Cool. So what makes a goth drum a goth drum?
It makes a what?
What makes a goth drum a goth drum?
Ah, thank you.
Oh, I need Jim for this one.
Yeah, because I was going to say there's different types of symbols.
So are we all at pass?
Yeah.
You want me to see if he'll come up and talk?
Does he know the answer?
Yeah, that'll be great.
I mean, he's a drummer. So.
Yeah, if he knows the answer, please drag him in.
Yeah, drag him in. So Beth Mazoff asked if we discussed the Goth umbrella, and I said briefly.
Briefly, we haven't gone into it in depth yet because we're still busy tangenting and arguing on what exactly makes goth goth.
Right. Could be a 12-hour discussion. But yeah, the Goth umbrella, it includes a whole lot more than what is the generally, but not always, accepted 6 genre. Goth rock, death rock, post-punk, cold wave, dark wave, and ethereal wave.
Malik opinion?
And it's fine if you don't agree. I just said generally accepted. I think death rock is its own thing, but
what did you say?
death rock is its own thing. But if we're talking umbrella, then death rock is like the twin of gothic rock or something. I don't know a good way to express it.
No. They are. Death rock is more close to punk and
Right.
also post punk.
Right.
So it can have some elements of gothic rock, but it's not intrinsical to it. So it doesn't
Is it
really
sisters?
need it.
I think that with death rock, like the common elements with goth rock come in the effects, like the distortions used on guitars. Like if you have like death rock that has common elements with goth rock, it usually comes in the form of like guitar distortions.
That is very problematic when it comes to death rock, because a lot of people like to make their distortion of the guitar very heavily, and whoever knows a little bit about death rock knows that that's not the case when it comes to death rock. We don't use like metal
I was going to say, it sounds more metal.
distortion to it.
Right.
So no, it can sound punk, very like punkish, but not even like I have ejaculación post-mortem, who is this Panamanian. I don't know how to say that. Is that right?
Panamanian.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Death rock band. They recorded their stuff in Spain too, and you can barely hear the guitar. You know, you can hear like some elements of the guitar, but it's more like bass driven and the drums that makes everything. You know, so I don't
And then
know.
there's some death rock that's very synth heavy.
Oh, who's death
Oh
rock?
yeah, there is.
That
Yes,
new
there is.
Skeletal Bats, the new
Yes.
Skeletal Bats demo, Putrefacto. There was like synth in that. It was almost like a kind of like dark wave sort of death rock.
Well, you listen to a lot of French death rock bands, and they're pretty synth heavy.
I think that's the French.
Oh, you think that might be cold wave influence?
Could be. Well,
Well, I wasn't going to say a cold wave influence, more just a cultural influence that, yeah.
I have an interesting question about death rock. Do you think that, especially like the early death rock in the 80s, that it was all like in the Americas? Because there's a lot of people who say bands in the UK and Europe were not death rock because specifically because they were in the UK and Europe. So I'm thinking bands like Sex Gang Children. Okay, Sex Gang Children, and a lot of their tracks, their sound is very close to that death rock sound. But there's a lot of people who say like, oh, they're not death rock because of their location.
What?
No, here's the thing, and this is where I disagree with most people, is that a lot of these bands, when they started, they were experimenting with sound. So you would have like one song that sound totally death rock, and the other one it's like more post punk or gothic rock or even punk. For them, they were experimenting on it. It's like when you listen to The Cure, for example. They will have like pornography, which is a really good post-punk album,
Hmm.
and it could lean to goth, but at the same time they will have like some new ways elements into it, and they
Right.
will have so many different kind of sounds that would make you question, like, what is this? So that's for me, that's what happened with Sex Against Children and many other bands like Kitchen and the Spoons and every other band
Well,
that.
I think it's important to for the early years to draw a distinction between death rock, as in what came out of like the U.S., the LA scene, and Batcave,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
which those are two
Yeah,
very regional
definitely.
because they both arose like in those
Congruently,
places,
yeah.
Well, and they have a heavy
yeah, they
punk
happen to happen
influence,
at the
but
same time.
they sound different. I always think of death rock as if early goth had a sense of humor. That's to me, death
Yes,
rock. Death rock
yes.
has a sense of humor. They don't take themselves seriously. They're just having a good time. They look badass and they make badass music, and there's a lot of twang in it.
Oh,
There,
well,
for,
speaking
for
of,
me,
oh,
go ahead,
how
go
about that? How about that? Pitchfork video, Evolution of Goth, or whatever they
yeah.
called it, where they said that death rock was an iteration or goth's take on rockabilly, which, like, okay,
Oh my
yes, there's
God.
some early death rock bands that did get into the psychobilly territory on some tracks. I'm thinking of like
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Alien Sex Fiend, Bone Shaker Baby, 45 Grave had a few tracks like Evil, or there was another one where it was like almost like psychobilly sounding, but
Yeah.
overall, I think that death rock is completely separate from rockabilly. Whether some death rock bands might have used some rockabilly elements as inspiration for a few tracks, sure, I could maybe like accept that, but I don't think the two are tied intrinsically in any sort of way.
It's like horror punk and
For
death
me,
rock.
I
For
think that
me,
just
a
means
very-
like someone listened to it and was just like, these are similar, so they must have related origins.
I feel like they just listened to like 45 Grave, Evil, or like Alien Sex Fiend, Bone Shaker Baby, and they were like, oh, this is death rock? It's
Listen
rockabilly.
to a comp.
But they listened to like one track and they were like, oh, this is gothabilly or goth rockabilly.
Well, people didn't know what to call it way back whenever, so it did get called gothabilly a lot. It did get lumped in there a lot, and it's afterwards that people have been like, "Oh, this is what's really death rock. This is what's really this." And honestly, as much of a pain in the ass as journalists are, between journalists and DJs, that's where the genretization is that even a fucking word? Who cares? That's where that stuff comes from because you guys need to categorize. I'm sitting here, I just listen. I'm like, is it good? Is it not? Woo! And I'm done. But you guys got to put together a show that all makes sense together and doesn't sound like you're having a
Stroke.
schizophrenic
You know what's
stroke.
interesting about gothabilly is that it really is just psychobilly. Gothabilly, the term was just thrown out. It was thrown out in the 70s. It was first used to describe the Cramps. The Cramps described themselves as gothabilly.
Nobody knew what to do with them.
Yeah,
Nobody had seen that shit before.
This was before goth music, so this was before like the word goth was thrown around a lot as a as it's used in a modern sense. And like the Cramps described themselves as a combination of kind of like gothic and rockabilly, and they called themselves gothabilly. But really, their music is what in modern day we would know as psychobilly. So people will ask me, what is gothabilly like from a music standpoint, or what does gothabilly mean? Gothabilly is it's pretty much synonymous with psychobilly if you're talking from a musicological music genre standpoint, or what the sound is. It's psychobilly.
Don't you think that the Cramps were kind of making fun of themselves by calling themselves gothabilly?
I'm sure, and I'm sure it was just
Or
like
at least just not taking themselves
tongue-in-cheek kind of
seriously.
thing.
Yeah.
I will totally play psychobilly music at a death rock set, and I have.
There are death rock bands who have psychobilly tracks. I mean, look at Los Carniceros del Norte. Like, they're a band from like the 2000s. They have some death rock tracks. They have like some tracks that are more like psychobilly. There is definitely, especially in that like 2000s, like late 90s, like death rock revival era, there were some death rock revival bands that were playing around with psychobilly in some tracks.
I feel like if you went to Mexico, they would say death rock revival. What the fuck is wrong with you?
It
Just
died.
got to put that out there because they've been going hard for 40 years. Just saying.
No,
And
no,
all of
for-
the Americas south of the U.S. border, and I think the U.S. too.
All right. So, well, from our perspective, though.
yeah, for them, it didn't die. That's
Yeah.
first and foremost. For them, it continues on and on. They have a lot of different subculture in their scenes. So you can have like a lot of metal people, metalheads, and supporting the goth scene. You have punks supporting the goth scene. The death rockers, they go to the punk venues and stuff like that. So yeah, it's very full of variety. But
Yeah, I mean, there's
on the-
even musicians who play in both styles of bands in different projects. They'll have a
yeah.
death rock group
Oh, yeah,
that they're part
yeah.
of and a punk group they're in.
that too, yeah, that too.
Isn't there a
Right.
guitarist in a punk band?
Who?
Isn't there what?
Who?
And on the death rock being not serious, well, I as much as I like to say that is not really the case. It is very serious when it comes to politics,
Yes.
and
yeah.
and also like what it means. It meant to be satirical. That is why we basically use a lot of the things that are happening in a morbid way, and to make it creepy, and to make it sound interesting. And a lot of the death rock in Spanish, they're all based on scary movies or horror movies.
Yeah, it's like
Most-
it's
most of the
music with a
lyrics.
message, but it has a sense of humor about it.
Yes, yes.
They just
Yes.
don't take it. They make fun of
It's dark
themselves.
humor.
They make fun of themselves, not necessarily what they're saying, because a lot of death rock that I've heard is extremely political, and they're saying some very inflammatory
Yeah.
stuff. But overall, they come out and they're dressed all crazy and they're having a good time doing it. They just got something to say as well.
Well, I think both music and humor can be very good communication tools to deliver a message.
Yes,
Definitely.
they are. They are. That it. I think we all can agree on that.
I won't disagree for the sake of argument. Okay, so to get us back on track, where do we stand on defining goth music vocalist-wise?
Vocally, there are many styles within
There
goth.
is, yeah.
There within goth music, and I don't think that vocals are necessarily there. I don't think there's necessarily a requirement in vocal styles, but I think there are certain vocal styles that are very prominent in goth music.
Mm.
So, like the very deep baritone male vocals, like that is one style that's very prominent.
Yeah.
Or the very
Yeah.
bellowing, like female vocals, like
Yeah.
the like Susie style, very
Oh.
like bellowing, kind of wailing, like female vocals can be like very like are very common. But I don't think one single vocal style defines goth music.
Not at all. You're right. You're totally right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be boring as fuck.
But there are a lot of duets. Because I can't think of really
Yeah,
many.
Candace Lupus does duets. Lycia does duets.
Yeah.
There's-
Paralyzed Age.
A
But
lot
does
of
that really
ethereal.
classify as a
It's a
lot,
few.
though?
But
You just have to listen to goth
Yeah.
music.
I don't think it
Savage.
it's a defining, like I don't think it's necessarily a defining quality, but I do think that there are prominent styles.
Yeah.
Well, it's very rare that when you have a dual vocalist, when you have a more masculine and a more feminine sounding voice, it's very rare that the feminine voice takes the forefront and then the masculine voice comes in
Correct.
with that bridge above. Like, I think
True.
Draconius Incubus does it. Is that? No. La Procession de Infinito does it. There's somebody
La
that does it
procesión del
that
infinito, no tan. Not really.
they don't
I
do
was
that.
gonna
Okay,
speak Spanish.
right.
There's-
Did you just make fun of my not having Spanish?
No. I was gonna speak Spanish because I don't know. I got switch
Oh,
in my head.
That's fine. We might be able to figure out what you're saying between all four of us.
Well, does Causa de Muerte do that?
Causa de Muerte, they don't have a male vocalist.
I thought they did on like one or two tracks.
There's several out
Really?
there that
What
have
the fuck am I thinking of?
more feminine voice bridging higher.
All right.
No, I'm thinking of another band.
But it's rarely
Shit,
when
what band
that
is it?
happens, when you have that baritone
It's-
and that feminine voice, then
Might be
you don't hear the
Dist.
powerful feminine vocals. You hear more ethereal feminine vocals most of the time. I was trying to think
Yeah,
of
but
powerful.
there are
La
definitely
Procesión has-
exceptions to that.
Malik, it's that band that did a song with like Japanese counting in it. And I think that might have been Dist.
There's certainly goth bands that have very powerful feminine vocals.
but with
One
masculine vocals. With masculine vocals.
with
Yeah,
Matt.
and
Oh,
the
you're
original
talking about
premise
duets.
wasn't
Singers,
whether or
because-
not it exists, but whether or not
Right.
it's common. And I don't feel
Right.
like it would classify as common at all.
No, I don't
Not
think.
rare, but maybe more of an uncommon.
Right.
Yeah,
and-
this
and-
is my pure based on feeling agreement with that statement. But only
Not
because I
common.
can't think of examples.
Right.
But-
Yeah,
But it's
with
two
I definitely
vocalists,
can't
y'all.
think
It's
of
not
more
just
than
a
two.
backup singer. These are bands that where the more feminine voice, while the masculine voice sings more, the feminine voice, when it comes in, is not just hoo, 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 hoo. They're actually singing vocals, and sometimes they're
Yes.
weaving in and out. And I think that is not exclusive to goth, but the way it's done kind of is pretty goth.
I would love to have examples of that because I really want to know what you mean.
Canis lupus.
Because that's not something.
Well, like Talking Heads will have, backing. Those fillers are backing vocals, but they're not going to really have like two leads.
Right. And it's closer to two leads than just backing vocals. Kind of like
Yes.
Have you ever listened to the B-52s for a new wave version of a band that does
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Where they're not. Sometimes they're backing vocals. They are sometimes, and they're fantastic. And those are powerful women singing, but they are also melodic and sometimes go back and forth with who is holding the melody at that time. So to me, that's not a backup singer. It's a dual vocalist, and while one may be
Yes.
more important to this song, others are more important to that song.
Well, and
Definitely.
I mean, the ultimate goth anthem, "This Corrosion," is an example of a leading male vocalist, but there's like, female supporting vocals. So if it like the chorus, like "Hey now, now," there's like there's the dual like male and female vocals. But I'm struggling to
I would
think
call that
of.
backup singing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm struggling to
exactly.
think of goth music, like of a good goth example where a feminine vocalist is leading and in a kind of a duet sort of setting, and it usually is like the more like duet kind of like versions of vocal styles I'm thinking of with goth music is with leading male vocals.
And I have one in my car, y'all. That's why I was trying to think of who it was, because the main vocalist is feminine. Is a very and it's a Spanish-speaking band. It's a Latin American band, and so she's got that big, deep voice. That whole kind of traditional Mexican singing. That's the country I know what the singing sounds like. So
Tell me the name of the
I
band.
thought it was La Procesión de Infinito.
La Procesión del Infinito. Okay,
I
I
thought
got.
that's who it was, but I don't know if it would be their last one. I think that's who it is, and it's got that because you know how I feel about Mexican goth when they put that little bit of traditional Mexican singing, and I am in love with that shit.
Wait. They are Colombian. Don't
Oh my god!
say they're
Right?
Mexican.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh,
They
shit.
are Colombian. They are Colombian. They're from Colombia.
Oh, okay. I'm
So-
an asshole, so I apologize for that one.
It's all right. It's all right.
Right.
It can happen.
No, and I
So-
I made the assumption based on the vocal style, so that's culturally insensitive. Good job, Michelle.
Yeah.
Good white person.
I know
No.
that.
I mean, it's all
Don't
right
worry
because
about
we've also. I mean, well, I shouldn't say it's all right. That's not my place. But we've also been referring to this as male and female vocals with a lot of very common assumptions as to the
Right.
sounds of that.
Yes.
When you could have a lot deeper female vocals, or even like those rich
A
baritones.
contralto.
'cause-
Yeah, you can have a contralto where you can't
Uh,
tell what it is, who is singing.
Well, I was gonna say you get people like myself that could hit some very deep notes, and that's still female singing. I don't care if it
Right.
sounds otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. Traditionally, how about
That-
traditionally societally accepted feminine
Yeah.
and traditionally society accepted masculine?
All right. Well,
I don't have
no.
a better
If
way
we're,
to
if
say
we're if we're going with vocal styles, then popular vocal styles would be very like baritone, deep vocals, or on the higher end of the scale, more bellowing, wailing altos, first altos.
Hmm.
I
And
would go with a second soprano. I'd go with a second lyric soprano on that, or I might go with a mezzo soprano, which would be a higher alto. But
I would say that that Susie would be more like somewhere between, and it depends on the track, obviously, but like somewhere between the first alto and second soprano,
Yeah,
but like more wailing vocals. And again, it depends on what we're looking at. Were we looking at that more harder leaning goth rock of the second and third wave? Are we including that like first wave kind of like post punk style in the mix? I don't think that vocals are a defining factor, but I think there are popular styles of vocals in goth that could enhance the goth sound.
Right,
Same.
and depending on if
Same.
you had like ethereal vocals in like a sister style song, like you'd kind of have like this dissonance, or if you heard like death rock vocals in I don't know, a dark wave song, like you'd be just like this doesn't mash up
Right, it
with
doesn't.
what I expect. So there definitely is like some connection between vocal style and particular like goth
Well,
sound.
I think thinking about how death rock sounds, I would say that you go more from alto one into your soprano, straight up into your lyric soprano. The more traditionally called feminine voices seem to be a little bit higher to me. I could be wrong because my experience with death rock is not as broad.
So when we're talking about feminine vocals, we're talking about second alto and higher in scale. And when we say more like masculine vocals, I assume we're talking about first tenor and lower in scale. So, and I think Dan made a good point that I don't think we should necessarily be making gender assumptions based on like the scale that someone's voice is placed at.
This is very
Yeah.
true. Last March, we did a Femvox mix, and I was going through and researching the bands, and I realized, oh, no, one of these vocalists is a trans man.
Mhm.
And we made an assumption based on how they sounded.
Yeah.
And
So
likewise, you could have a lot of non-binary people who are going to get thrown into binary categories.
Yeah,
So,
that too.
Right.
yeah. So if you go by the musical scales, then
correct.
at
Yeah.
the lowest musical scales, you do have like the bass voices.
Mhm.
And then at the top of the musical scales, you have your first sopranos. So those are kind of like your scales, is like the bass into the baritone into the tenors, and then altos and sopranos.
Right. So some of the problem that we have here when trying to explain this music is the societal constraint in describing vocals. Is your average person does not know the difference between a mezzo soprano, a contralto, a soprano, a tenor,
Correct.
a bass, or a baritone. Now, if we say baritone is the average sounding voice that we hear, like, what is that? Andrew Eldritch. I was like, what is that linen suit wearing guy with the ugly glasses? Andrew Eldritch. Yeah, well, but checking.
You mean the guy who's definitely not a goth?
Yeah. Well, he may not be
Yeah.
a goth, but his music is
That guy.
goth. So, anyway, so that's what a baritone voice would be. I'm trying
That's
to think.
what the baritone voice would be.
Well, there's there's a lot of that is the pattern.
Baritone
Standard.
bass, borderline like baritone bass.
But
But
Hyde, who may not, some people don't think that they are goth. Hyde is a mezzo soprano. Powerful.
and I mean, you can also go by scale. There's like, but if I say like a middle D minor, you know, the average listener maybe who doesn't have musical training is not going to know what I'm talking about when I say. But we could say like mid-range, higher pitch, lower pitch. I mean, like I feel like the average listener would at least understand those descriptors.
Yeah, it's just like if I started using the hertz for the frequencies of it, because I'm very used to that with mixing music, but that doesn't really translate well to most people's ears. They wouldn't know what levels that comes
Be right
in.
back.
So where we're at is we know it when we hear it, because that's a very unsatisfying definition.
yeah.
I think
it's a very
there's a number.
satisfying definition.
I think there's a number of staple styles in vocals. There's a number of staple styles in vocals. Again, with goth music in general, if you want to come up with a definitive definition, I don't think there is going to be a definitive definition. I think there's going to be a number of traits that are common or popular, but not all goth music is going to hit every single one of those. So you can kind of come up with a list of like these like common or popular traits within goth music.
Like what if you have
those would be closer to the center of a genre cloud.
Genre cloud. That is a good way to put it.
Yeah. So so there are a number of staple vocal styles that are popular within the genre. So very like deep, heavenly kind of bass or baritone vocals is one of them. Very bellowing, wailing, kind of like mid to semi-high range vocals is another one of them. Like your first alto, second soprano, that's going to be your Susie style. But not all goth music is going to hit those staple styles.
Yeah, and I think that's why going back to that like term of, you know, when we hear it, I'm honestly very comfortable with that definition because it is an art. It's music. I think that is a better way of defining it rather than trying to come up with mathematical formulas for what the drum rhythm should be or the different frequencies that people be singing at or any of these other.
Brought up a good point in that we all love Detoxy, but I would never say those vocals sound goth. And that's what threw me about the band the first time I listened to them. I was just like,
who?
Detoxy.
I don't know Detoxy.
Oh, you should.
I don't think that vocals in themselves could necessarily rule out a band as goth, but I think like if you add up a number of elements and say like, well, there's this and this.
Rule in a band as death rock.
And that's why I say that the overall sound is way more important than any of the other technical classifications. Like if we're going to measure the like dry wet mix of a distortion pedal or something else into it and use that as one of our many variables, it just seems ridiculous at a certain point to really narrow down these ranges for a lot of different elements that goes into the overall production.
It becomes too technical to the point where it's useless for trying to explain it to anybody.
Yeah, unless you're trying to program it into a computer to generate goth music for you, you don't need it to be that technical.
When you put it into that level of tunnel vision, you lose the experimentation, you lose the dynamic life of music, and what's the fucking point? Music changes. It changes with the people and with the times. Because, I mean, back in the 80s, if you played some of the shit that we call goth now, they'd be like, fuck you, get out of here.
Right.
Or they would have just liked it and danced anyway.
But the thing is that in order for, at the end of the day, in order for something to be considered goth, like it still has to fit within, these parallel lines that we have drawn. And if it strays too far outside of that, then it's just simply not goth. Or whatever genre we're looking at.
And even that, Even those definitions, though, as you were bringing up before, are going to change over time because not the same people are not around that were around in the 80s or 90s that are around now
I
necessarily.
strongly disagree with that because at that point you get a new subgenre or just a completely new genre in general.
But if the new generation of people are fine with that as being their definition of goth, then
well, that's why we have waves of goth. All the different waves sound very different, but they're still goth. And if they ever went beyond that, then
they
maybe
still have
something
that dark
new.
That dark sound. Some of the genre that are untouchable in other. Although everybody sings about death, let's just get it over with. Everyone sings about that shit. They have some of that descending scale, that darker sound. There are certain things that you hear in goth music that you rarely hear in other music, like the bass being quite that important, except for shitty jazz sometimes, like the Jerry Seinfeld theme. Not goth, but there are some things that really have that feel to goth that are unique to goth. There's a lot of unique stuff.
I think it's a combination.
I'm just thinking of subjects that are just everything, and yeah, I feel like there's like this pool of elements, and pull out 2 or 3 or more, and you're probably going to be pretty close. But let me tell you something. I finally heard post-punk that wasn't goth, and I was like, what is this shit? And after I listened for a minute, I was like,
people call it hipster wave.
Well,
no, but
it
I
had
actually
post-punk
like
elements,
that
just
stuff.
not the goth parts.
There is post-punk that I love, and is not goth at all.
Thank you. I love most post-punk.
I don't like not
I mean,
post-punk.
I draw a fine line between goth,
I think the
important.
I agree with Azzy, but I still like both. I do think they're different, though.
I think like the important thing here is to draw the line and understand it, and then don't call it what it's not. That's the important thing here.
Well, then gather the Council of Goths and have a formal vote on exactly what the definition is.
I think that's right now.
That's a good point, though, is general consensus. There's this idea of general consensus, and general consensus does not mean that every single person agrees, right? So there's general consensus. That means more than half of people kind of like share a common idea. Doesn't have to be a super majority of, like 5/8 or 3/4 of people more, but like if more than half of goths kind of agree on a certain idea, that's a general consensus.
More than half the
goths.
More than half the goths.
Well, let's start naming. I don't know if you did already, but let's start naming the old goth. The so-called goth bands.
I want to start with Bauhaus, goth or not, because in my opinion.
Yeah, let's start saying that. Yeah.
In my opinion, dark post-punk.
Depends on the track. Well, some post-punk is goth in my opinion, but so for me, depends on the track, and it's very track by track. I can think of a few tracks that are maybe goth.
Well, this is true of a lot of those early bands. It's track by track. It's album by album. So when a band that has like 10 albums and only one of them is kind of dark post-punk and people start calling them goth
That's not a goth band.
On the basis of like a single album, I hate that.
Yeah, and like what your fucking makeup looks like, it doesn't make you goth.
Not goth rock. That I will give you that. I don't think Bauhaus is goth rock. What I consider goth rock is to be like second and third wave, like more like a little harder leaning. But dark post-punk, what I would call goth post-punk. I think there is a goth style of post-punk that kind of like started everything. But yeah, a dark style of post-punk. And actually some of their tracks aren't even that dark in sound.
No. Exactly. That's where I want to get at.
Bauhaus has tracks that aren't that dark in sound.
Oh, right, but they're still fucking innovative, and they help make this genre.
And that's what's so important. And that's why, like, it does a disservice to these bands to lump them in as a single thing, because it ignores their contribution to our kind of, like, musical history into goth rock.
But if we say they goth, we're not saying necessarily that they aren't other things as well. Because the question was, were they goth, not are they not other things?
But the thing is that when you...
But there were some Joy Division tracks. Like if you listen to the track "Disorder" by Joy Division, that's a hard rock track. That's not even post-punk. So it's very track by track. I think it's hard. here's the thing: is I don't know that you could necessarily accurately ascribe one single genre label to an artist's full discography. And it's that thing about like, is goth something that you could be? Like that a person could be, that you could ascribe to a person or an artist or whatever? Or is goth something that we merely participate in? And some things are part of, or some, is goth something that some things, fit into? And, like I, as a person, like I do generally consider myself a goth, but sometimes I think like, I'm into some goth stuff, but there's, a lot more to me outside of goth, or I don't know, is goth something that you could ascribe to an artist overall, or even a person overall? So that's more of like an existential question.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is yes.
Well, so long as, like we were saying with the bands, it's not exclusively the one thing, then I think you can say yes, because people are going to have those multiple facets. But if we're saying it as, no, they are automatically just like boiled down to this singular thing based on a single interest, then we're going to have the same problem we were having with bands, because they're just groups of people anyway.
Well, I mean, I generally consider myself a goth because most of my interests and hobbies and personal life and activities revolve around the subculture.
Yeah, and I do agree with that.
Down to the cigarettes you smoke.
Yeah, I agree with that to an extent. Ooh. I smoke Marlboro Menthols because I'm absolute trash. So
Sobranis? I smoked Sobranis way long ago.
Did you smoke the Black Russians? Sobrani Black Russians?
Yeah, of course. What's the point?
They do have Sobrani. They have Sobrani cocktails, which are really cute. They're like pastel colors. They're like rainbow colors. They're very cute. Yeah. I wanted to order them, but I can't.
What are you talking about?
A brand
Can we talk about the Cure?
What about the Cure?
But
I don't really know shit. I don't know.
The Cure.
Again,
will it goth?
Depends on the track.
Yeah, I think they are.
Well, no. Will it goth or
What do you mean? He even said he's not goth, and
a lot of goth.
And he respects the goth subculture so much to even call himself a goth.
But so, he's not the whole band.
No.
Overall, I would say no. Because I would say more than half their discography is not goth.
Oh, that's
in
true.
Sound, like from a genre perspective.
Exactly.
So I would say no.
Hi, baby.
But at the same time, I would say that they were huge staples in developing the goth sound. There were a lot of artists that were huge staples in that, and it's kind of like that, like influence versus like if an artist was very influential in goth, does that make them goth, or does an artist have to come into like the goth sense of being and continue to be goth? Like I said, like again with like Corpus Delicti, they're like a goth rock band through and through, or Angels of Liberty was a goth rock band through and through.
Well, their music may be goth, but they don't have to be goth. Not all musicians who create goth music are goth, consider themselves goth, and or are goth. I mean,
some of them make money out of it.
But if we're talking
from
purely music,
that's right.
That's true. And some maybe in a band with other people who are goth, creating goth music, but they just want to make music. Yeah. They just want to fucking make music, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm in this band, and I'm not." They're not goth. Other people might be.
Yeah.
That's very true. But if we're talking from a purely music genre standpoint and talking about just their discography. Like there are bands that are like their discography as a whole are pretty much goth. Like I said, like Angels of Liberty or like Corpus Delicti, like their discographies are like purely goth. But then there are bands like The Cure or Bauhaus where my answer
in goth.
Yeah, where my answer is going to be it depends on the track. And bands like Bauhaus or The Cure, they're going to be the bands that did create very relevant cultural staples that became very widespread and circulated, and really created a lot of influence that led to artists who did produce mostly goth music in genre.
All right,
we've pissed off Chad about The Cure.
Right. Mm-hmm. Emily says the majority of The Cure's work is legitimately pop rock, but I think it is an interesting sociological talking point to discuss why so many folk who love goth music also love The Cure. And that was the case back in the 80s. Just, I mean, I'm sure you guys know that. Cure heads looked
Because it's
Yep.
a lot like
fucking
goths
great
and stuff.
music.
Well, it was played a lot. I hated The Cure until recently because saturation, baby. Saturation.
That's fair.
And
But-
because someone made her a great playlist of
was
songs
pretty
by
good.
The Cure.
Well, my favorite song by The Cure is actually 100 Years. I fucking love that song.
Yes.
That's a fabulous song.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a good one. Something
I
small
have a
falls
few.
out of your mouth and we laugh. And I'm like, oh, that's so gross.
But
My
Beth
favorite
Razak
might be
says-
the Holy Hour. That bass line. Oh my god.
Beth Razak says, "What's more goth than A Forest or the Figurehead?"
I'm not sure.
100 years?
I mean,
Well-
then we get back to how do we measure goth in
Well,
order to
Beth
decide
Razak-
what's more goth than that.
Right. I
If-
think
if
the
you're-
influence of The Cure, though, is unmistakable in that early music. And so,
Oh,
pulling them under the goth
absolutely.
umbrella, even though they themselves didn't only do goth, and they did a lot more stuff that wasn't really goth. I mean, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, come on. But I think that accepting them in goth, while they may not actually be goth, I don't have a problem with people saying that they're goth. I don't. Even
They're
though
not
Robert,
goth overall. That doesn't mean that some of their stuff isn't goth.
well, I don't know that Robert Smith still has a huge problem with that anymore. I think he's mellowed about it.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I
He
think
says
he
he's
was.
not goth,
he's
but I
the-
don't think it bothers him like it used to.
I don't think he was
Mm.
ever ultra resistant to that the way that
No.
like Andrew Eldritch was. I think it's more
Yeah.
he didn't want to be boxed in creatively to
Right,
one single
right.
style.
Yes.
Right.
And he also said something about respecting the goth subculture to the point that he
Yes.
don't want to identify himself with something that he doesn't consider himself part of.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. He's. I've seen a few interviews with him. He seems like he's really not got that prima donna thing at all. He seems very down to earth, very kind, actually very shy in interviews. I've found him to be very charming.
So
Well-
I'm curious with the idea of with what's more goth than a forest, and I don't mean literally what's more goth than that, because maybe it's not what the majority of their discography is, but rather the quality of those songs which are goth that they put out, even if they put out a lot of other things that are not goth. Because then it could be taken from a qualitative standpoint instead of a quantitative, because they might make a lot of songs because they're just hammering away, trying to make as much music as possible, getting that practice in, coming up with ideas, and some of them might not be goth, but they don't want to just throw them out either. So
Right.
if they come up with a few very solid goth songs and most of their music is not, are they still goth, or is the definition that they're not goth because the number of songs they made are not goth?
Well, the band itself, I don't know that they would be goth, but the people in it, of course, are always, to me, different. You know what I mean? Because the people are just different than the music
Yeah.
that they make. The music is like its own entity.
Right.
It's like its own
Yeah.
living thing.
But it's also I think there's a spectrum. I don't think there's like, there's
Yeah.
people or musicians that are goth or not. I think there are people and musicians who are either not goth or goth. But I
Fair.
think there's a gray area. I think there's more of
Yeah.
a spectrum in between.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, I come from the
Yeah,
gray
same.
area. Everybody was a gray area back then.
Yeah.
You didn't, if
And
you
that's always
asked
how
about
I
goth,
viewed it
people
myself.
just turn around and leave you.
Yeah. Like I said in the previous one, like the time I use the term goth the most is when people are like using the words to describe me that would be even more incorrect, like emo. And so just like, yeah. you know, so not that, but more like this.
Like if people ask me, are you goth or are you a gothic? I actually had an English person ask me if I was a gothic.
Yay.
I was like,
Oh, I saw that on
I
the
will say
channel.
yes, but I will not usually. I know what my channel content is, y'all. I get it, but I will not usually
Yeah.
go, hi, I'm goth. Hey, ho, ho, ho. I just I don't think of it that way because a person has many labels, and that's just kind of one of them, I guess. Many.
Yeah,
labels.
I usually say I'm Malik. Hi. That's it.
Same.
That's it.
Not. Hi, I'm a goth. My name is Malik.
No,
Yeah.
no. I'm not a. I'm
Wait,
Malik. That's
But
it.
are you
Doesn't
Malik
even
or is your
matter.
goth name Malik?
No, I'm Malik. That's it. Hi. How are you? Yeah. So every time someone says, "Are you a goth?" I'm like, No, I'm Malik.
Oh,
Get
that's
it?
yeah.
Get it? Get it?
Right. Well,
Okay.
but you could be
If
both.
someone asks me if I'm a goth, the answer is going to be either yes or I don't subscribe to labels, depending on what mood I'm in.
Yeah, I
like
just
that.
go with yeah. I just go with yeah, and then they start saying, "Oh yeah, I love
Generally,
Marilyn
yeah.
Manson," and then I tell them what
I
goth
usually
really
just
is.
go with okay.
That's
Oh.
I've also done that too.
No.
Yeah, yeah. As
Or
soon
I'll
as
say
they, as
like,
soon as
yeah,
they
I'm
say
into
that.
a lot of goth stuff, you know.
But when
But
you,
like, it's more. I think that brings up a good point, though, is that there is this like difference between um there is a difference between sociological, sociocultural kind of aspects to goth and musicological genre categorizations in music, but I think there's also a space where they intersect. There's a space where sociocultural elements and musicological elements kind of intersect, and there is an area of nuance. And I think when you what we see online, especially when you look at like Reddit and things like that, it's going to be like these very black and white discussions of like it's either goth or not goth, and there's no
those
gray
people don't know
area,
what the
there's
fuck
no
goth
nuance.
is half the time. I mean, when you try to take goth and you try to put it into this very little specific thing, and you try to fully define it and put it in a box, you don't get what goth is. You just don't get it. Goth cannot be fully defined. It can be defined, but it can't be defined to the point
Yeah.
where there are no exceptions, where there's nothing. I mean, it's almost like it's its own language, where there's always going to be an exception here. There's always going to be something new coming from a different influence here, even though the basic part of it stays pretty much the same. I
So,
just,
And it
yeah.
has to be. It has to be like that because otherwise
right.
you're unboxing the creativity
Right.
of the music makers. So yeah,
And,
it has to be.
it'll die with us. It's lived 40 years for a reason. It's still around for a reason. I talk to people who are 20 years old
Exactly.
who have more knowledge of the 80s music than I do. And I was like, shit, I was supposedly there. And so people are still loving some of that old music. Sure, some of it sounds kind of dated, but, you know, honestly, some people care, some people don't. I used to love music from the 60s when I was 18. Okay, I still do.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference between general definitions or general defining attributes and absolute definitions, absolute attributes. I think very, very few theories in this world can be called absolute definitions. So things like temperature. If it's 72 degrees Fahrenheit outside, that's absolute.
Right, but
But
whether somebody thinks it's
very
hot or
few-
cold isn't.
Yeah, but there's very few things that are absolute, and there's very few definitions that are absolute and have no nuance. And goth certainly has lots of nuance to it.
I mean, clearly we've managed to piss people off. So.
Oh, yeah.
But we have.
Yeah,
Yes,
Beth
quite
herself
a-
left.
Especially us.
Oh, you're pissed off?
No, I mean
No one
Cassie
here.
and I.
Mhm. A little bit. No, I'm just bummed out Beth herself left.
Yeah.
But
No, I'm just catching up. I hadn't been reading it.
What about Joy Division, goth or not?
I say go.
No.
they're post-punk. They're dark post-punk.
I
Right.
say no, but I do call them proto goth. I do think that they were an important precursor.
Yes.
But
Mhm.
I say no. I say my hard line is Joy Division is pre-goth, Bauhaus is the start of goth. That's generally like where I kind of draw my definitions from, but it's, you know, I'm open to arguments to the contrary.
No, I pretty much agree with you. But you had to look at the influence of Joy Division, what they were listening to at the time to create the music that they
Even
did.
besides
You know,
Bauhaus.
so
And let's not forget that a large portion of Joy Division sound came from Martin Hannett's production mixing. Joy Division originally kind of thought of themselves as more of a punk band. And Martin Hannett's production mixing is partially what gave them that very like reverberated, effects heavy sound. The final product of Joy Division sound was a lot of audio engineering. So it's that also brings up a good kind of like discussion of like artist intent versus what the final product sounds like.
Well, it's like Susie and the Banshees did an album where they wanted it to sound like Iggy Pop, and it came out sounding like Juju.
That's the best album.
Yeah. Well, Gorkrow makes a really good point. If Joy Division looked and acted like goths instead of frat boys, they would probably be called goth. And that brings up a question that's actually in my discussion notes is like, if a band sounds goth and doesn't look goth, looks like frat boys or hipsters or however the fuck, is it still a goth band?
Musicologically, yes. Culturally, maybe no.
Feel
like
comfortable
Black Marble?
like calling them.
Well, I do feel
Fireboy?
comfortable calling the Buzzcocks punk, and they dressed in like button-down shirts and shit like that. So I don't know. They
So
look,
did Joy Division.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah.
wore pants and shirts with button
Yep.
shirts.
But
Yeah,
what if
sometimes-
a band... Sorry.
sometimes you got to dress a certain way to get into the venue to play in the first place,
This is true. Like, what
which
if
is
a
also
band
confused.
doesn't sound goth but dresses very goth?
There is a
Yeah,
lot
Liz.
of music that is a lot of music that is appreciated by goth and doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
is goth. Like for example, Depeche Mode.
Right.
Okay.
New wave. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's synth pop, new wave.
Oh, it is?
They
Okay.
play with all of those sounds, and we happen to like it. You know.
Some of us.
It's like when we appreciate Nina Hagen or appreciate David Bowie. You know what I'm saying?
Nico.
So, I don't know.
I think that's where Drab Majesty kind of sits. Like they have some stuff that kind of ventures into goth, but they're loved by. I call it loved by goths.
They're not goth.
Well, I
They're
didn't
not
say-
goth. They even say that in their Twitter. So you can argue
Yeah.
about that.
Have
But at
but
the
we
same
gotta
time,
say how-
That's not what I
Andrew
just
Eldridge
said.
says, Andrew Eldridge says the Sisters of Mercy aren't goth, but they're one of the gothest sounding bands I can think of. So I wouldn't necessarily say that how a musician categorizes themselves is indicative of true like genre. But the thing is, I think we're circling a lot around that distinction between socio-cultural relevance and musicological terms. So like from a musicological standpoint, that's just the sound of the music. So what the band looks like doesn't matter. What the band thinks their genre is doesn't matter. It's the sound of the music that you're going to pick apart from a musicological standpoint. But from a socio-cultural standpoint, that's where things like aesthetics and the band's intention and interpretation and their involvement in the gospel come into play.
Well,
But
it's
also
like-
the lyrics are very important.
Yeah.
If they don't have the lyrics that are called upon us, then no.
So if we took the band Sansombra and let's pretend that Brandon dressed like Garth Brooks and sung about popsicles and cotton candy, but still sounded exactly the same way that the band sounds,
There's
what would we call them?
that, but you mean the lyrics? Why the lyrics are also
The
In
lyrics,
The lyrics are about popsicles and cotton candy.
okay, but the lyrics are same.
but sung in a goth
Oh
fashion.
no, the lyrics are.
The lyrics are about popsicles and cotton candy,
but sung
but the
goth.
music sounds exactly the same, just from a music standpoint. And Brandon dresses like Garth Brooks.
No, I mean no.
the
I mean I
band
don't
still
care
got-
how he dressed. I don't care how he dressed. The lyrics are very important.
Mm.
What you say is what you stand for. So no, I mean I don't.
So goths can't stand for cotton candy.
Or popsicles.
it can.
I know.
in a
Unless
different
it's death
way.
rock.
In a different way.
Right,
So,
not for all their
I think the
songs.
pastel
not like
goths are
that.
going to
It's
come
not
for
like
you.
that.
The pastel goths are going
Ooh.
to come kick your ass, man.
Bring
Oh.
it. Bring it, bitches.
Krista's gonna come after you.
I was gonna say I wouldn't mind the pastel goths coming after me.
And again, I think lyrics are an element of socio-cultural elements rather than musicological. Because if you're talking about musicology, you're going to be talking about pretty much purely the sound. So the sound of the music, you're going to be talking about like the instruments, the techniques, the sound, and not necessarily the content of the lyrics, but the sound of the voice. So that's going to be like your musicological analysis and
For
culture.
me, it's everything. It's not
But-
only just two things.
But yeah, sociocultural
So if the album
elements.
cover isn't goth enough for you, they're not going to be goth because it's got to be everything.
It gotta be everything. For me, that's the music I choose
Yeah.
to listen to. It
But,
gotta be everything. I gotta be the lyrics. It has to be the sound. It has to be everything. So it's not only two things or one thing.
But you said
or
not how they dress.
not like that. What?
But you said before not how they dress. You don't care how they dress.
No, I mean no.
Well, then it's not everything. It's
Because
some of
you can look at Double Echo and I like it and I don't care how they dress.
Right,
They
and that was
sound-
my
they
point
sound
before that.
proper.
Like even their
You know what
album
I'm saying?
cover could be just like a picture of cotton candy. Going back to that, so long as
No,
well,
the
the
lyrics
music.
are
so
not
long as the
about
photo's
I didn't
black
say
and
the
white.
lyrics. I said the album art. I said the album art, not the lyrics.
The count says Malik needs the foreplay, the toys, the undies, everything.
It has to be a black dildo.
Well, and I'm out.
Yeah. A
Sorry, Danielle,
huge
welcome to
one.
Thursday.
Candy goth. All right. What
But
kind of candy?
if we're going to talk about like the sound, so if we're going to strictly analyze the sound, what makes the sound of goth music from a musicological standpoint? Again, I don't think there's a definitive list of it has to have these exact elements or it's goth or not goth. I think there's more of like a long checklist of staples of goth, and it's like if you have a certain amount of those elements. Then it's a goth track rather than having to check off like every single item on that list, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, if you check off every single item on that list, it's pretty much going to be robot music. Shitty robot
Or it's going to be
music.
the same song over and over and over again. I mean,
Yeah.
that
Whoa,
was looking back at punk, that was like the Ramones' entire discography, right? There's all their songs were like the same song. All of their songs were rock and roll high school, basically.
Not all, but I have made that argument with Rock and Roll High School and one other song, Rockaway Beach.
Rockaway Beach and
Yeah.
Rock and Roll High School, they're the same
Yeah.
song. Okay, like
Which I
maybe
got into
I
a
want to
fight
be
with my
sedated and
girlfriend
Bonzo
over,
goes
so
to
I'm
Big
going
Burger.
to
Totally
avoid that.
different.
I'll use a less polarizing example. AC/DC. So like most of AC/DC's discography is like the same song, basically. So
Dirty Deeds,
but
Done Dirt Cheap, and For Those About to Rock and Back in Black are completely fucking different songs.
Highway to Hell.
Those are
So,
all different.
all right. But
Ian asks, so who gatekeeps which bands are goth and which aren't?
Nobody.
Honestly, I think that boils
Not
down
me.
to who's going to the shows.
It,
Oh, I go
and
to the
who's
shows,
supporting the
but
music.
I don't guess I gatekeep. Well, okay, I do. I moderate groups.
You
or I
do
kick
by
people out.
showing up.
I think there's a lot of things that go into that, though.
What do you mean you do by
I
showing?
think
I don't
there's,
even know what that means.
There's general consensus within the goth community, like we talked about before. General consensus meaning like roughly more than half the goth community. And there's certain elements in the sound musicologically that make a band goth. And again, they don't have to have every single element, but they have to have a number of the elements. Or else the community, you're not going to get that or that general consensus without having a certain number of those elements. So we talked about there's a couple staple styles of vocals, but you don't have to have one of those staple styles of vocals. We talked about driving bass lines. So we agreed there's a number of staple vocal styles. There's the driving bass lines. But I would say another thing is scale. Again, this is not going to be every single goth song. There's going to be some exceptions, but generally it's going to be minor key and descending scale that is going to be what accounts for your dark sound.
Right. Sorry, just reading the comments. This shit is hilarious.
Yeah, me too. I got lost
they're
here.
Great. Like I like Lady Gothic says they should have one band that please every genre of goth. This way nobody bitches.
Then we just have the one band, and yeah, then it'll be
band
perfect.
that
We can
is
do
goth,
the
whose
Instagram
name is
eyebrows
goth.
and get our lips injected, and we'll all be goth.
And Arthur Frost makes a good point, saying, I think fans of goth culture would disagree as to what is and is not goth based on their various age groups. I think
I think
is
that's obvious in
absolutely
this
true.
discussion, y'all.
Just a touch.
But I don't even think it's going to be like uniform amongst the age groups either. But I do think you will find a different general consensus in different age groups.
I think it's going to vary based on experience, age group, where you grew up, what your first band that you got into the subculture through was. Like, so many personal factors.
I think people who grew up in the 80s are going to be more open and broad than someone who grew up in the 90s. Like someone who grew up in the 80s, that was a time where things were first coming together and things were a lot more like open and experimental. In the 90s, I think there was a little more of a definitive sound. So someone who came up in the 90s is going to have maybe a little more strict guidelines.
Well, I think that's absolutely true of the 90s, considering that, in my opinion, like what I've seen of the 90s is that's when everyone was trying to be goth without, telling anybody that they're goth, because that's the most ungoth thing ever. And you ended up getting a lot of really like boring bands towards the late 90s, I think, because people were trying too hard to fit into like to check all those boxes on your list.
And also, I hate to do this, but now we're going to have to define growing up in the 80s or 90s, because if you're born exactly 1980, you're only turning 10 as the 80s are over. So
yeah, that's someone who I would think came of age in the 90s. So let's say someone who spent their high school years in the 80s versus someone who spent their like teenage years in the 90s, because those are the formative years where we start to really like discover music and develop our music taste. I would say like teenage years into our 20s. So someone who spent their teenage years in the 80s is going to have a much different perspective than someone who spent their teen years in the 90s. I mean, I spent my teen years in the 2000s, so it's a little bit of a different story for me. But I just like from research and from talking to people in the scene that the 80s were a lot more experimental and open, and the 90s became a little more definitive. That's when the goth label, at least in the United States, really started to be thrown around.
It's also when it became under attack even more, and you had instances like Columbine where people were like deathly afraid of it, and Satanic Panic and all.
Yeah. Or even like the West Memphis 3 case where they weren't goth, they were into metal, but it was because they like dressed in black clothes and like had kind of dark interests, So it is like instances like that where there was this kind of like media panic. I mean, you look back on, you can find on YouTube old clips of the Jenny Jones show where they're like bringing on goths and punks and stuff and saying like, look at this freakish teenager. We're going to make them over and make them like an acceptable person in society.
Yeah. And likewise, I think that's why you had some people being more exclusive in who was counted as goth, because they didn't want to be associated with the people that were doing these horrible things that were causing stereotyping of goths.
Right.
So I don't know. I think there was a bit of that exclusivity of like, oh, that person's not goth. They're, they might be dark and brooding and wear black, but they're also, there's something off about them where they might do one of those horrible atrocities, and they're not necessarily even listening to gothic music like many of the examples that came up before, but sort of things that society would mislabel as goth. And I think that,
people gave goths shit in the 80s too, based on how they looked.
Oh, definitely.
It wasn't like Columbine. I mean, it was before Columbine, so people have had to take shit about that for, decades now. But yeah, you couldn't go anywhere without being followed in a store. It's automatically assumed you're a criminal. And you didn't have to look so terribly goth like all the photos of all the Susie goths that you see. That's not what everybody looked like. That was some people looked like that. They looked great. But it was much amplified after Columbine. That was very detrimental. But people outside this country didn't have to deal with the same stuff that we have to deal with here. We still have the fallout from that. We still have people screaming shit at us.
Mm-hmm.
But it does.
It depends on region.
Yeah.
It depends on region too, because like when we were down in Tampa, like for Absolution Fest, there were people that were passing like the Orpheum, or we were outside the Orpheum or whatever. There were people driving by yelling stuff out their car. I've never had that. I live in Pittsburgh. I live in northeastern United States. I've never had people ever like shout anything at me for like looking alternative. I've never been like in high school. I was maybe a little bit slut shamed for it, but like I've never had people like specifically like target me in kind of an aggressive way like that before that for like looking alternative. I've maybe had like soccer moms at like the gas station side eye me in the suburbs. But
Ian makes a good point, and I agree with him. They yell at everybody, not just goths. It's the cruising street.
Right.
Yeah, but that's still something you don't get as much of in other places. Oh my god, I'm getting a lot
What the fuck is that? I've had somebody actually outside of a restaurant where I met a friend, and yes, I'd been playing with my hair and makeup and stuff, so we had lunch there. And I swear to you, these people were well over 45. They had to be 50, 55 years old, where the wife starts yelling something at her husband. They'd met to have lunch. She's like, "You gotta see this shit!" So I hid behind a car until he got bored and left, because she had just seen me and gone, and pulled that kind of shit in motherfucking Denton, Texas, at lunchtime, people who are supposedly old enough to know better. So it just depends on where you are, and there are people in Florida that were honking like 2 feet away from us, but this huge group of freaks standing outside the Orpheum, and I'm proud to say freaks, just didn't even flinch after that happened like twice. Nobody cared. We're just like, "Hey, how's it going? Yeah, you're super original. Yep, never heard that before."
Yeah, even though that was something I wasn't used to, people like yelling at someone for like looking alternative or whatever, it still didn't faze me, because I do live in a city, and like I've been out where in areas where I get like kind of frighteningly catcalled, like not in a very scary way. Like I'm
not laughing at this. That's bad. I was laughing at chat.
I've had that happen. I've had that happen too.
There are areas here, like the south side of Pittsburgh. It's like there's drunk people all over the place. That's where people go to party. There have been times where I've been out there like walking, and we've had someone, like friends and I have had someone follow us in a car alongside us, yelling stuff at us. We've had like a group of like 6 different dudes pass us and like say like catcally things to us. So like people saying stuff to me that's kind of like alarming. I mean, I don't want to say it's not scary, but at the same time, like it's not like I react like I'm so surprised. I'm not surprised by those kinds of things.
I'm surprised by a giant truck honking less than 10 feet away from me for the first time in the evening when I wasn't expecting it. That did startle me. And I was just like, fucker.
I mean, I'll admit, I'm both used to it and get startled by it, because I've gotten it for over a decade for being trans, and people fetishizing that, and then being goth and trans, that really doing it for some people. So yeah, it's not fun at all. And it's alarming because it does trigger things that have happened, but it's, at the same time, something I'm extremely used to. I mean, I can't walk down the halls of my school without people having shouted tranny at me. So yeah, both students and when I was a student. So
yeah, but people cannot handle themselves as they should.
No.
Yeah, I have been called a faggot before, and in Puerto Rico, where I'm from, and I've been called many names, many weird, stupid names,
Yep.
and I had that happened before. So when I came here, I'm although like I don't usually go out like looking like this. Um, I had people look at me like weird and going in a different direction just because the way I put my hair, or not even because of makeup, because sometimes I don't even wear makeup. I just put my hair up, and they just discriminate at me because of that. And I think it's important for us to keep doing it, because we're basically telling them, here we are, and we're not gonna stop.
Yeah, they're not
We're
going to
gonna
win.
keep being ourselves, and we have the right to,
Mm.
and it's very important.
Yep. I used to get it because I had huge boobs.
Yeah.
And you can't at that point say, because somebody can say they're incorrect, that some things are a choice. They're incorrect. But when the shit is growing straight out of the front of your body, they're less likely to say that that's a choice. So people will yell for anything they think is different. And I'm talking, y'all, they're fucking cruel. Fucking cruel. Yes?
Hi, Mason. Sorry,
Shit,
Mason is
Mason's
here.
here. Yay.
I sometimes get people saying like yelling stuff at me or saying stuff to me because I have tattoos. Not because of necessarily like the goth thing, but like I have had strangers, like most of my tattoos are on this arm. Not all of them, but like most of them are on this arm. I've had strangers in public grab my arm and say like, "Oh, let me see your tattoos." Like out of nowhere, I've had like strangers like grab my arm and say like, "Oh, what do you got there? Where did you get your tattoos done?" And it's just like,
I've had people touch my fake eyelashes when I'm wearing something particularly weird. Like I had some that had these feathers that stuck out. People would walk up and touch my eyelashes. So they just don't have those boundaries. I've had people touch my hair. You guys have seen that it gets kind of large. It gets big. I've had people touch it when it's up, and all you think is you're gonna fuck my hair up, asshole. So they just can't handle something that is different than themselves, something they see that seems alien to them. And I think that we all deal with it on different levels in different places.
I haven't
Although,
gotten
I
anybody
think
try
Daya
to touch
gets
my
stuck a
hair
lot.
recently.
What?
Oh, I said I haven't had someone try to like touch my big poof hair recently. It's probably because I'm always rolling with my crew and they're afraid we're gonna beat them up or drink their blood or something.
I've had people across the
It
street to
definitely
get away
helps
from me
having
too.
people.
But this thing, they shouldn't be a thing anymore. Like
You
we
think?
need to break from it. We need to put ourselves out there in order to let them know that um we have the right to be here. We have the right to express ourselves. Just I just read a comment by Glasswind Angel saying I was bullied for dating a bisexual guy. That thing, it doesn't concern anybody.
It has no meaning in
It's
anyone's
none of
life
their
except whoever they're
business.
fucking. Literally, it means nothing to
Exactly. It
anybody
shouldn't
else.
be. It shouldn't be any of the business. So fuck you. Fuck you for being like that.
Right.
Don't be like that, People have to understand and respect others' privacy.
Right, but we have
So,
people within our own subculture who are shitty about stuff like that.
and that is why I
yeah.
say, and I categorize on this, and I say people like that need to look on Goth again and say, do they stand for this? Do they stand? Do the Goth subculture stand for this? No, it doesn't. So quit.
Right, people do not know how to mind their own business. They're gonna objectify or fetishize you in any way possible. And I don't know about other cultures, but in the U.S., God, we sexualize every fucking thing that exists. Everything you do is considered some kind of a sexual act, and I'm like, can I not just be without you thinking about something banging or pulling on? It's
I mean, it even is part of our vocabulary for how we describe things, including the music.
Right, exactly. So maybe we need to come up with a new way to describe the music. We can do better.
It bops.
What?
It bops.
It bops.
It slaps.
Well, that's why I avoided that one, because I was like, we're sexualizing slapping, so.
What slaps?
It bops.
People, yeah, that's why I went bops. I figured that's pretty safe. Bop it.
Mason is
do
just...
know you need to be pervs in a healthy, respectful way.
Right, that's true. Well, yeah, and that's, not that hard. You just have to be able to actually speak about things. And I know it's scary, but tell your truth and you'll be fine. People who can't handle it, they don't need to be around you.
Did you want to read Mason's comment, Michelle?
I want to read Ian's comment.
I agree, man. I'm sorry you've had to go through that. I'll let you disrespect me to make up for it.
I no, I don't need to disrespect anybody. That's the thing. That's exactly why I believe that it's so important for people that are getting new to goth and that are wanting to identify like this, is that they know our history and they know what we stand for. You know?
Malik, what did we decide made us elitists?
What?
What did we decide made us elitist?
I mean, because we don't stand behind racist or bigotry. We don't stand behind people who are transphobic or homophobic or any gender phobic or any phobia regarding other peoples or racism and all that. Forgive me for using the wrong terms because English is not my first language, but I don't understand how people can come up to Goth and say, yeah, because I hate people.
Wait,
that's not the purpose of Goth.
Oh, they're Goth because they hate people? Oh, that doesn't even make any sense.
Or
it doesn't make any sense.
We talked about
people think like that. People think that that's the way through.
And we
talked about
because
that.
They're a little bit weird and people don't get them and they just get tired of dealing with people. So they become loners defensively, not because they start out life hating people.
Right, but we talked about this, what was it, the first week, about how we have, all of these predators who find, who think they can find a fucking home in our subculture.
Oh, yeah. We gotta police that shit. We just gotta keep kicking them out.
Hard.
And exactly. You accept everybody. Well, it's we're not going to accept anyone who's going to be violent and bring violence into our subculture.
We don't accept shit.
Right.
We don't accept shit.
For me, that is why it's so important to keep certain amount of elitism or gatekeeping or whatever is because of the hate mongers and the homophobic and all those people who like Nazis and people like that.
I don't think that that's elitism. I think that is gatekeeping because we do have to keep our culture safe for ourselves first and for other people who might just be interested in going. Because if you get to be known as a culture that has a shit ton of predators in it, I wouldn't want to go there. I wouldn't want to find anything out about it at all. I would just fucking disappear. Yeah. But I also want a safe place for me, or as safe as we can get it, because there's
for everybody. We want a safe place for everybody,
right.
And that's our main thing. We don't want people to hate on others, because we being hate on. And that's very important for us to keep the boundaries of what Goth stand for. I don't need
Right.
you to be goth to enjoy our shows or
Oh, hell
whatever.
no.
I don't want you to be like us. That's fine. That's fine. That's something within yourself. I don't care. I just want you to stand with us on the same matters, on the same things that are important, you know? And
Right.
that's
All right.
that's all about that, you know. So we need to create some sort of consciousness on the newer goth and the people that don't know these things, and let them know that we don't stand for hatred. We don't stand for um um
No,
bigotry
there's no
Oh,
place for
no.
that. And that's why
Right.
even there are bands who, within our subculture, even if they are amazing bands, no one talks about them. No one
Sucks.
admits to listening to them
It sucks when
simply
they're really
because,
good
like,
and
it's
they're
a bunch of
shits.
Nazis.
Yeah, and they're
Right?
Yeah, I
they're,
mean,
they're
we've
fucking
had that
shitheads.
issue.
I don't care how good their music is. I'm not going to listen to it. And some of those bands, you know, I did. But
exactly.
Yeah.
I can't like them now because all I
And
can think is Nazi, 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 dickhead, womanizing, anti-feminist fuckwad.
yeah.
Exactly. And so, like, we might listen to that music, but we don't play it in spaces. We don't go support the shows. We don't buy the albums. And
Exactly.
Yep.
I mean, that's my stance on a lot of people that, even when they're very popular, like a Michael Jackson figure, like, I don't need to contribute money to someone that's, even if it hasn't been conclusively proven, that, you know, has those types of allegations against them. My money
Right.
is better spent elsewhere.
Right.
So on the question if goth is a gatekeeping subculture, every subculture is. You
Right.
don't go to a Rastafari and say, no, now I'm going to dress different than y'all because, you know, and I'm going to listen to different music than you all listen to. So it's not like that. It doesn't work like that, you
Rasta
know?
is
So
really.
goth is the same thing. You don't go to goth and say, now I'm going to introduce Haymonger and hating on women and you know stuff like that. No, you're not gonna do that. Fuck you, and we're gonna punch you out. That's what we're gonna do.
Well, we're gonna go get someone like Malik to punch you out. I don't want to wreck my manicure. No, that's
Get
good. I
me,
will.
baby. Bring
Yeah.
them.
If I see
Bring them. I'll
someone,
fucking punch them.
if I see someone getting shit, like if they are being especially sexually harassed, I will stand. I will just get in between the harasser and harassee. I
oh
have
yeah,
done
no,
that.
I have put young women in the fucking DJ booth with me to get them away from people who keep creeping on their ass.
I've walked up and just started talking to him, and eventually, somehow, my back is to the creep, and I'm talking to the person, and we're kind of
Oops.
walking away. Hey, let's go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I've done that shit. Like,
Oh,
Yes, same.
yeah, because I'm just like, no, nobody has to put up with that shit. You know, I just kind of think, what do I wish people had done for me when those kind of things happened to me? And I'm like, okay, here we go. So I got no problem with someone punching a Nazi in a goth club, even though goth clubs are generally non-violent. You can come, you can hang out, come to the
Exactly.
shows. I mean, in Dallas, if only goths could go to the shows, nobody would ever come here because it wouldn't be enough people to support any show.
if there's ever a fight, it's not going to be me starting it, but I will
Right.
fucking finish it.
Right, I will take you down with me.
Same.
I wear a lot
I'm
of pointy
all about
shit
it.
for a reason.
Yeah, I'll
I
take you down
believe
with me or I'll embarrass you
everybody
while I
here
try.
is like that. I believe everybody, like Dia, Ashley, Michelle, we're all like that. If we if we have someone who are trying to hate on others or take advantage of others, we definitely gonna kick them out. And
Right.
that's the way it is for every subculture. I mean, I don't know about other
Probably quite a few.
subcultures, but I'll tell you about mine. I'll tell you, we don't tolerate. We have zero tolerance when it comes to that. So
Right. And we need to keep it that way. And we need to also,
Sorry.
if we have bands
exactly,
that are
exactly.
what we call problematic, then of course everybody should be able to defend themselves because when somebody is convicted in the court of social media, it's not exactly fair because people bandwagon, but we also need to be aware when these things are happening and fucking investigate it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Figure
Yeah.
out what's really happening.
Yeah, and we don't have tolerance for any of this. So
Right.
it no. I mean,
Sorry, everyone. My internet cut out for a minute there. We had to reset the router.
Yeah, that's what Jim said.
Yeah, Jim kept us well informed of the situation. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
I feel like it sounds like I missed like a very good heavy discussion, but
Well,
so
that's what we usually have here.
back to defining like goth music or what makes goth music. So I think our list, like we let off with, there's a number of staple vocal styles, driving bass lines, minor key descending scale. So what else do we need to add into our checklist here?
I mean, I'm still personally fine with the definition of we'll know it when we hear it. I am very comfortable with that.
Funny.
Well, I think that's generally like how it goes, but
yeah, if we wanted to add some more to it, no
so
accordions.
we're talking
It
about
fucks. That's another checkbox.
No,
Okay.
don't sexualize it.
we're
It
talking
fucks.
about like common staples, though, right?
Right.
Like, so this is not necessarily every goth music has to have this, but this is like general thing, like a general checklist that goth music tends to have at least some of these things.
Okay, and what it has, and not focusing on things it does not have, like accordions.
Accordions are badass, though. I do.
I mean, I think it could work. I personally think if we challenge ourselves to make a goth song that included at least one non-goth element, it could totally be done. But why?
Why?
I think it depends on the style of goth music too. Like
Yeah.
dark wave obviously is going to have synth in it, but not all goth music is going to have synth in it.
Right. Unfortunately, it all can't be perfect.
That's funny.
You know,
So guitars.
with the right synths, I could just emulate
On
all the
guitars, I
Well, I
don't
want
like.
to say, I don't know. I hear a lot of reverb.
Yeah.
Reverb or delay, because those two can
Usually
be
both.
like, yeah, those two, it could be both or it could be one or the other. There are songs sometimes like guitar is heavily delayed and people will mistake that for reverb or vice versa. So like usually reverb or delay, some type of like echo or canned effect on the guitar.
Definitely.
Jangly, usually it's like some type of like brighter sounding distortion on that kind of like minor key guitar. So like if you think about jangle rock or jangle pop, which is like usually like beach rock, so you think of like the Beach Boys or like or surf rock, like
I've been hearing so much surf rock lately in just a lot of genres. Like it just sneaks itself in there. And
Adam Can Vanner says that Kai insists that a goth song must contain scything to be goth, but they don't think that's necessarily true.
I don't think that's true, because I mean, like think of like Sisters of Mercy, Temple of Love, that's power chords.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I don't think that's necessarily true.
the wooden fish instrument.
I do agree that that's a very common strategy, very common technique. But I don't think that's necessarily required. Again, like I said, I think there's more of like a general checklist where it's like, oh, you have to have a certain number of these things, but not necessarily hit every single bullet point.
I mean, and even that, like, again, it's more about the sound. I don't think it's. I know we're just tossing around this phrase like a certain number, but I don't think it's literally a number either.
No, I don't think there should be. It's an exact number, but I think like there are common staples, but not necessarily requirements.
Especially if the song's pretty minimalistic, because then it might not have a lot of the things that make up goth, and just still sound that way with what it does have and doing it well.
Oh yeah, like Cold Wave.
Well, I'm thinking,
What?
I mean,
I'm thinking like specifically of a band that I listened to recently, Morosynth, who makes goth rock, but it's very stripped down.
Byronic Sex in Exile.
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes it might just be guitar, drums, bass, and that's it with minimal effects. Like I think, well, and vocals, obviously.
There's some minimal wave that is like very goth in sound. I mean, I'm trying to think of like the American quote unquote cold wave. I know cold wave has a number of different meanings depending on region and stuff, but more of that like minimal post-punk sound. This Cold Night, or like some tracks by like Skeleton Hands, very like minimal in sound, but they are very like that dark gothy kind of sound to them.
Oh yeah, because This Cold Night has definitely made some goth tracks.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
Like
definitely.
Black Cherry.
I would say overall.
I was gonna say Black
majority.
Cathedral, but whatever.
But he looks like a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
Shit, I have a letter from him that I need
Are
to
you saying that goths aren't nice, man?
You haven't said that?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. It's that his haircut is very normie, you know, he's very I don't know.
Clean cut.
Yes. So, I mean, but it's definitely goth. I mean, I freaking love This Cold Night. It's really good. It's really good. Actually, what was that? Yesterday morning, I was listening to 1885.
Oh, 1985.
1985. That one. Yeah. Very good
That's
song.
the best time of my life.
Oh yeah.
Passion punching walls.
In 1986.
I really love that EP.
Yeah,
Very good.
It's really good. Nice work. I do like 80s goth suicide, but that was my introduction to This Cold Night.
Oh, Black Cathedral was my introduction, and then Enigmatic Individual was just like what cinched it for me.
Enigmatic Individual, that was my first track I think I heard of This Cold Night, and I was immediately hooked. I made This Cold Night my recommendation for when I was on Cemetery Confessions. I made that one of my sinister suggestions.
It's so good.
It's a good one. I'm ridiculously excited about that album. I forget when it's supposed to come. Who knows when now? But.
I don't know, but I still am very pleased, and I'm going to shamelessly self-plug here that I got to do an interview with him, and it's up on our website.
That's very cool. He prides himself on no social media.
Yeah, he does no interviews. He found he found us talking about his album because we reviewed or talked about Black Cherry, and I talked about how just amazing and relevant Black Cherry was for me at that moment. And he found it through a web crawler and emailed us.
Interesting.
Oh.
And then asked if I would do an interview of him, and I'm just like,
based on what I've seen from This Cold Night and having gotten the letter about the album and stuff, it makes perfect sense that for anyone to do an interview, he would want it to be Obscura Undead. That makes perfect sense to me.
Does it?
Oh yeah. He would not want to go with something slick. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say you're not slick. I promise, I don't mean that. He would want to go with something more underground and more grassroots. Absolutely.
Isn't that the best though? Like when you shout out a band on like social media and they reach out to you. Like I did a countdown for my favorite goth bands of the 90s, and I made Corpus Delicti #1, and so Corpus Delicti has like contacted me on social media and stayed in contact with me and stuff, and like it's like such a huge honor when these musicians contact me, because I'm like, I'm not worthy.
Yeah, I wish I had time to do more interviews. Like, I need to do an interview with the Kentucky Vampires and like a bajillion other bands, but interviews are really intimidating.
I've never done an interview.
What is
with intimidating?
A band before. What is intimidating about it, Azzy? I'm just gonna.
Coming up with something that actually means something in the context of their art to ask about.
Yeah, like you don't want to ask them. Like I worry about that.
What inspires
you? That. Like Yeah, I've thought about like if I were to interview a musician, I'd have to like come up with questions that because I'd be afraid that I'd ask questions that'd be like, oh, this old question again.
That's the whole point
exactly
of my interview series, y'all. That's the entire
Yeah.
point of it is I don't write down a single question. There's preparation, don't get me wrong, but there is no specific question. I talked to Twin Tribes for 15 minutes about fruity cocktails. And
I don't
honestly,
have those conversation skills. I tend to just listen, and then I'm like, oh, I need to talk here. You stop talking.
Yeah,
See, it's weird too because I have like those conversational skills one-on-one, but I do question whether I'd be able to do an interview like with Tears for Dying right now because like I got early access to their new album that's about to be released.
Mhm.
Like I've been talking so much with Adria, the lead singer. She's been sending me like guitar riffs she's working on. We've been discussing lyrics for songs we're both working on. But if you were to tell me I was going to interview the band like tomorrow, even though I talked to all the members in it, well, most of the members in it, like I would be hesitant. Like, I wouldn't necessarily be scared of it, but, like, I would be very concerned about what the final product would be.
do it anyway.
Well, I mean, it's not something that's being offered. Like, we're just talking, but that's why I use them as an example. I don't even have a platform to do interviews, so that would
okay. That part is the problem. Although you could possibly get it up onto OU. Just saying.
You have Obscura Undead.
My point
Anyone
is to do it anyway. Y'all, every interview I've done has terrified the shit out of me. Every artist I've asked, I'm terrified. I almost have a mental breakdown before every single one of those interviews, and I just fucking do them anyway. I know it's easier said than done. I very much understand that, but I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Well, I feel like none of us do, right? Like we're not like professional journalists or anything. We're independent producers, and that's
why we piss people off with our opinions on the cure.
Yep. But
which I still feel really bad
Why
about.
does this video have downvotes?
I mean,
no, it's just a friend of ours left.
I was gonna say a friend, a closer friend left. But yeah, I don't know that I would even call it an interview. I would still do it and just be like an evening with and insert the band name. And just make it more conversational.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And you can also evolve it. Once you've done a few, you'll have those grassroots ones, and you'll always be kind of cringy, but kind of sentimental about them. And then you just improve. That's what you do in life. You improve. You learn your lessons. You improve, and you move on, and things are better. And I mean, it's just like it's kind of like that. If not now, then when? I have more fear of the what. I mean, I have a huge fear of rejection. But I also I can't live with the what if. There are points in my life where I just can't live with what if. And that's what compulses me to do embarrassing shit.
Oh, God, same.
Oh, I definitely feel that. I just really hadn't.
Right.
Yeah. I just really hadn't felt compelled to interview anyone. It was just where this conversation went. And I was like, well, hypothetically, then that would be...
But if interviewing is not your thing, then don't do that. There's always going to be some kind of genre.
All things are my thing. I'm excellent at everything I do.
I've heard that about you, but I saw it in your handwriting on the bathroom wall, so I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta self-promote.
The closest thing I've ever done to an interview was having Michelle on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, but there was
Michelle and Abigail. Yeah.
Right. We had a good time.
Yeah, that was fun.
That's what I'm really looking for. I'm looking for a good time, y'all. And if I just so happen to get an interview out of it,
I saw that on a
cool.
bathroom stall.
So I read it twice.
Yeah, I'm gonna spill the not so secret is that like I would say half, maybe not quite half, but a good number of the videos I post on YouTube are completely scripted, like 100% scripted out, like what I'm going to say.
Oh, I can see you reading. It's cool.
Yeah, especially if it's like very information packed content. Just because like I don't want to like forget anything. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that isn't scripted. Obviously, DIY videos aren't scripted. The video, I posted a video today where it was like, I wasn't like scripted. I had like certain bullet points I wanted to hit, like topics I wanted to hit on, but it was more like, I was like reading, like I was looking at like an outline, but like I was just kind of like going off the cuff talking. But for the most part, like especially that video essay, the posers, elitists, and goth video essay, that was completely scripted out. I wrote it out. It was almost like I didn't even mean. It's not like I was intending to write that, but it was like more like the idea came to me, and I started writing and that's where the best content comes from. Is where like an idea hits you out of nowhere and you just start writing.
I just practice like fuck all the time, and I call them false starts. I have had 50 false starts on some of my videos because I gotta get, once I get the introduction right, I'm gonna be fine. But I've had 50 false starts, and I just research the ever-loving fuck out of stuff. And so when I talk about music, I have as much as I'm going to know because the script makes me nervous. So
I'm laughing because how we do it is we just turn the camera on and we're just like, hi, and we just let whatever comes out fall out on us.
That is my style. Where do you think the chaos is coming from? Well, it's all of us, but yeah.
You know, it's
Mason just said that they are very glad that I posted Mort Sikika. So, if anyone hasn't heard of them yet, one of my current favorites.
my wife does not lie.
Okay, so, but I think Adam said, if Darkwave had subgenres, how many would there be? Infinite.
7.
There would be a lot. For me, the ones that I could really specialize in, I would call them goth rock darkwave and post-punk darkwave, or goth wave, as Obscura Undead has coined.
I'm all like, woo, darkwave. So 1.
That's just more shit falling out of us.
People talk about like, or ask me like, because I made a video about those two styles, and people are like, what about neoclassical darkwave? And I'm just like, okay, I don't really, that's not like a ton of music I've really sampled or analyzed or could really like speak to. But yeah, there's goth rock based darkwave, there's post punk based darkwave, there's a lot of different styles of darkwave.
I don't differentiate. I'm like, yay, darkwave.
I'm sticking with my answer of 7, and I'm not offering an explanation.
But there's also
Yeah.
there's styles of genres, and then there's fusions of genres too. So so like a style of a genre is really just like a genre or subgenre in itself. That is just like uses certain effects and distortion and production mixes to give it a certain sound. Examples? But then you have I would say that some of that goth wave sound is like more of like a style of dark wave where it's like mixed in a certain way where the guitars are kind of have a more like a mellow atmospheric effect.
What's a goth wave band? I don't have experience with this.
Okay.
Goth wave is.
All right, so you think of dark wave. It's like goth music with synth elements,
right.
And or like dark rock music with synth elements. So like there's goth rock dark wave where it has that more like harder leaning second and third wave style goth rock, that more like sister style guitar work. So like some stuff by She Passed Away would be like in that mix. Paralyzed Age, some of their stuff in the 90s, like Bloodsucker, that would definitely be like a more harder goth rock dark wave. But then you have like more of like the Twin Tribes where they use like that more like kind of mellow atmospheric guitar work. And that would be more of like your goth wave, your post-punk based dark wave. So those are more, in my eyes, style choices than they are really the structure of the music itself.
Right.
Whereas, like, there's fusion genres where you're fusing two genres together. So, like folk punk, like Dropkick Murphys or something like that. They're fusing two genres of music together.
I do not like that band. I like the Pogues.
How about Days and Days?
I don't know what the fuck that is.
Folk punk or crust punk. More crust punk, I'd say, out of Austin, Texas.
Oh, I have a quick question. Do we actually have a bedtime tonight? Because I do not want to go until midnight 30 again.
I mean, that would
I
be
feel good
nice
about
because I
that.
do
Can
still
we
have
stop
to
at
work.
10? Can we stop in half an hour?
Can we stop in 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Then I could actually have a snack before bed. Because I gotta
10
be up
o'clock
and...
is technically
that-
my bedtime.
Speaking about different genres like that, that is like saying that indie rock and alternative rock is goth, and that's not the
Well,
case.
I've seen a lot of arguments about that lately about the indie post-punk and people, it gets lumped in with the rest of, with like the goth post-punk, with the whole post-punk revival thing, and then, a lot of goths like it. But I've seen people raging against including that because it's too indie.
Wait, which...
What do you mean by
band.
too indie though? Like indie,
Like the more indie sounding post-punk,
Like Cold Cave?
Like Black Marble and...
Yeah, like Black Marble. That's a really
Interpol.
good example.
Yeah, I did not like them.
Because
Yeah.
to me, in my eyes, indie just means like on an independent label.
No,
You mean like
talking
Rose Garden Funeral Party?
But you mean like the more kind of like poppy, like hipstery, kind of like major chord sounding like
Pale
music.
Waves.
like
Pale
post-punk.
Yeah.
Waves.
But yeah, I think definitely a darker sound is required for the goth
Definitely.
music. So definitely like kind of like minor key or descending scale. Again, there are some exceptions where there's like minor key that ascends or like major key that descend or well, I'm having a hard time thinking of goth music that is like overall in the major key. I'm thinking there might be goth music that has like certain measures, like maybe like the verse is in a major key, but the chorus in a minor key, or vice versa.
I'd say some songs by The Mission.
But in general, I would say like goth music has the dark sound. The dark sound is usually derived from minor key and generally descending scale, not perfectly descending. Because if everything was perfectly descending, it would all sound the same. It would be just like notes going down, like.
Yeah, but it could be descending in intervals where it might go down a bit further, then up, and then down further.
Yeah, when I say generally ascending, I mean like the usually like each few measures like ends on a lower note than it started on. It works its way downward, but maybe not perfectly. Like maybe it goes up and down in a pattern, like descendingly.
Is that a word?
No, I just made it up. Whatever. But descending downward, generally descending downward, maybe not perfectly descending downward. But that's a pretty common staple in goth music. Minor key is a pretty common staple in goth music. Quick descension. So that's just that kind of like contributes to that dark sound. There's a lot of like indie post-punk, or there's a lot of like general post-punk. There's many styles of post-punk. It's such a large umbrella that like goth music is only like a small style of that post-punk branch. Like, I mean, you think of like the early post-punk bands like Talking Heads, Violent Femmes. Those aren't goth bands, but they were certainly post-punk. There's post-punk that's derived from glam rock.
Violent Femmes were very well loved by goths in the 80s, for the most part. They were extremely popular with your average goth. I'm not saying they're goth. I'm just saying that's one of those bands that's not goth, but is well loved by goths. And it could fit into the same thing as Drab Majesty, especially in Modern Mirror. Like, Shoegaze was similar to that. Not goth, but loved by goths. I think some stuff by Drab Majesty borders, but maybe not so much Modern Mirror.
Oh yeah, there's certainly stuff by Drab Majesty that is dark wave, but like the like indie post-punk stuff, there's post-punk that is like derived from like West Coast garage rock. There's like post-punk that's derived from like glam rock that isn't goth at all, that maybe doesn't have that really like dark sound. So that's a lot of style choices. That's a lot of like, and I don't consider scale or key to be a style choice. I consider more like effects and distortion to be like style choices. But it's a combination of the two. So I consider like genre and subgenre, like the structure of the music, because I've had people ask me, what do you mean by structure of the music? And when I say structure of music, I mean the stuff that can be written on sheet music. So like time signature,
Not the
key,
Fruity Loops shit.
scale. Yeah, time signature, key, scale. Those are things that can be written on sheet music. The style choices are everything off the sheet music. What effects and distortion are you applying to your guitar? What choices are you making in the production mix? Things like that. Those are off the page. And the structure is more like on the page.
Right, like when they're hitting all the foot pedals and the singer suddenly disappears and all of a sudden a bunch of different sounds come out because they ran to the back.
Yeah, so the structure is more measurable. Like time signature, that's measurable. Key, scale, that's all measurable. Style choices, the effects you use, the production mix you use, that's a little less measurable. Yeah, there's maybe more granular measurable elements in there. Like what level of volume you're putting each element in the production mix and things like that. But generally, like the things I could pick out just by ear, by listening to it, things like time signature, key, scale, those could go on a sheet of music. And like style choices, like the effects that are applied to the guitar or the production mix. Those are things that I can't listen to a song and by ear say like, oh, they set the guitar at this level of volume and the bass at this level of volume. I could say one's louder than the other, but I couldn't tell you like exactly like the megahertz that they set each element at by ear.
Well, I have one final band that I want to ask of all of you as to whether or not it's goth, and that is Specimen. Goth or glam?
Ooh, they kind of ride that fence. I think they're humping it when they ride it, but they ride that fence. I always think of it as glam rock and black.
They have a lot of elements. It's like I said, they were experimenting with the sound. So yes, they have a lot of elements on that.
Sound wise, overall, I'm gonna go with glam rock, just purely from a sonic.
I just love the way they look, and I don't care what they are because they opened a gateway, and the floodgates opened, and here we are.
Yeah, it opened the gateway to me thinking that maybe some guys can be pretty.
Also, thank you for the back.
Y'all, as a person in the 80s, men wore eyeliner all the time in the 80s. It was I had a friend, I would put his eyeliner on and do his hair so he could go out and, go out and pick up chicks, but, not the best thing, but yeah, he was popular when I did his makeup and hair. I've always thought everybody looks good in fucking eyeliner. I don't get why people think eyeliner is a woman thing. That's stupid. It's an everybody thing.
It's not. It's not.
You're wearing eyeliner or you're just wearing eyeshadow?
Yes, I am wearing eyeliner.
Well, eyeshadow does not have a gender. I mean, why? That's stupid. That's one of those gender normatives that makes no fucking sense to me whatsoever. Neither do skirts. People wear skirts all over the world. It doesn't matter what you've got going on in your underwear. Wear a fucking skirt if you want to wear a skirt.
That doesn't determine gender anyway.
Well, all those gender norms are socially constructed. So, like the ideas about like what clothing belongs to what gender, it's all socially constructed, and it's changed over history. Because if you look at like the 18th century, like in the 1700s, men wore heels and stockings and powdered wigs.
Calves back.
Yeah,
high heels are from Louis XIV. Those red court heels. They're a result of.
He got them from the Persian cavalry.
Yeah, and say he fucked chicks, so he probably fucked everybody.
So gender norms about like clothing and how you present yourself and all that stuff is 100% socially constructed.
Yeah, definitely, I agree with that.
Right. I'm trying to keep up on the chat. Someone said the word lame. By the way, Jim, I love that word. I use it all the fucking time. Lame. Specimen is goth. The border death rock a little bit. Yeah, I Specimen to me is I don't really. That's a band I don't really define. They're not one of my favorites, but I fucking could stare at them for hours because I love the way they look so much. But they're important, and the whole glam rock movement is important because of the gender bending parts of it.
Yeah.
And the in your face sexuality. I mean, just different than heteronormative sexuality is. I mean, it's important. We should finally start to figure that out slowly.
Even musicologically, glam rock has played heavily into influencing goth. Like if you listen to like Sisters of Mercy, like their sound, like they definitely borrowed elements from glam rock.
Goth rock has glam rock elements. It has from surf rock. It has from what is it? Oh god, the genre's not called psychedelic.
It is psychedelic.
Is it called psychedelic?
Wait,
there's
are you talking about
psychedelic
like
rock
psychic TV psychedelic?
Psychedelic
rock.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't really
Like the
sound what we
phaser
think of as
from
psychedelic.
Phaser.
It's softer than you think it'll be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my
Thanks for
article
tripping.
I wrote an article about goth rock for Play Alone Records, and I described it as kind of like a combination of post-punk, hard rock, and glam rock elements.
Yep. Somebody Count Knight says Specimen equals death rock plus post-punk, and that is probably right where I would put them too. Plus, I mean, everybody looks good in fucked up fishnets and black lipstick. I mean, don't we? I mean, and a shitload of makeup. Well, I mean, you can wear makeup if you want to or don't. I like a lot.
It depends on the track too. Again, like
it depends on the track.
Yeah,
For
so
me,
many artists like the answer when people say like what genre is it, it's like my answer so often is it depends on the track. For like Specimen, like a track like Beauty of Poison, that is a pure glam rock track. But Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, okay, let's talk about maybe like whether there's like goth merit in this track. So it just like it depends. There was a lot of experimentation with sound in that era.
Yeah.
Right, that's true. That's true, and it's what built what we have now. All that experimentation, while we may have a little bit less of the experimentation, especially according to Reddit, that
Reddit is wrong.
Reddit is always wrong. It's wrong by nature. But that's what built this genre, and some of that experimentation is saying, I feel like with the anger and the brashness of punk, once it kind of just spent itself, for lack of a better term, it looked inward. And when it started looking inward, that's where we get death rock and post-punk and gothic rock coming out of that. It's my personal theory. It's not like I read anything like that. Not like I read like 5 or 10 goth theory books, which I have, but I'm just saying.
I mean, that's totally not in anything I've ever read before, Michelle.
Well, it's the grief cycle, y'all. It's the fucking
say
grief cycle. What was that, Dan?
I can say I haven't read them.
Oh, I think that Dave Thompson put it in his book. I think
Who's
that's his
Dave
name.
Thompson? What book?
No, I have the wrong name.
I have that death rock book. I haven't
Into the
started it yet.
Reptile House.
Is that the Sisters
I
of
don't
Mercy
know.
I
one?
think
No.
that was Thompson. I think so. And
Okay.
of course, there's like Mick Mercer wrote a bunch of books too.
I have those. Well, a few of them.
I mean,
Okay.
like
Everybody, I gotta go now.
It's bedtime.
Bye. Yes.
Oh, you gotta go. Malik gotta go
Gotta
night
work
night.
tomorrow.
Yeah, Nancy's got to go
So
as
do
well.
I. It's pumpkin time,
I have
guys.
to work, but I just don't give a shit.
Oh, I do give a shit. Good night. I love you
Yeah.
guys.
All right.
Okay,
Hey.
well, we're signing off. Well,
Bye.
yeah, I'm not gonna sleep anyway, right? Okay, so good night, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up
Bye.
and giving us all of your
Mm,
very welcome opinions. And thank you to the audience, the chat people, for being respectful. We
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you
it.
everyone who
And
stuck out.
sorry,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
Yeah,
you,
Good luck.
everybody.
You know what? Just fucking
yeah,
message him.
as he's going on an apology tour, it'll be all right.
We're all gonna be.
This is
fine.
my life.
You gotta stop
Sorry.
apologizing for being alive. We'll talk.
Yeah.
We'll discuss this more,
Yeah.
child.
Well,
I can't call you daughter because you're just a child of mine.
Thank you, Mother.
I love you, baby.
Oh.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Bye.
night.
I should stop the chat.
Oh, what is it? Unpleasant dreams.